He clung to one wild dream, becoming something truly great. A legend of an adventurer, the kind the world whispers about in awe, but his one-of-a-kind power. A thriving vegetable garden bursting with fresh life. Right when he figured his life was finally done, the ground suddenly erupted alive and full of movement, harvesting meat from trees, gold carrots, and maybe a golem or two showed up to make it worse, with his lazy sister in tow, and childhood buddies. He's seconds away from farming his way into pure dominance. The world's strongest weapon built to end everything. Might be the fertilizer after all. Even the mightiest kings will drop to their knees for him. When you start growing miracles of your own. In the provincial town of Arcel, everyone was gearing up for the festival of the descending gods. Once a year, on this sacred day, the gods said to dwell in the heavens come down to earth, and the whole town throws a massive celebration with pomp, music, and ceremonies. At 15 years old, the gods handpicked you with special gifts boosts that fuel adventuring, trading, and crafting, each blessing packed with different powers. On the day of the festival, Geobur faced whatever was coming next. He burst into Senna's room and yanked her awake. Shaking her hard, she mumbled for a few more minutes, but he wouldn't budge. He snapped, "How much longer is she going to sleep?" and yanked the blanket off her, shouting that today was the festival of the fallen gods. Senna blinked through the sleep and told her older brother to stop acting up, because he was definitely being naughty. Her kind, big brotherly spirit snapped at her to shut up and hurry, because if they didn't move right now, they'd miss prayer. Senna stretched with a sweet sigh and reached for her brother's hands. Then he shot back, all indignation. "Seriously, can't you at least get dressed yourself?" The girl frowned and pouted hard, making it crystal clear that she was crushed, and the protagonist just sighed, "Yeah, she's spoiled to the core. They'll only grow up after today's celebration when they get their gifts." This year, he and Senna hit 15 together same age, but one was his brother and the other was his sister. Senna always called him Big Brother, and now, right when it mattered, she said it again. Even though their fathers were different, he was born a few months before her, and he had no clue what his mother wouldn't tell him. Her love for them had clearly run out. And yeah, that's not exactly a fair reason. Is it? His father, a great adventurer, had been dead for over a year, and since then he and Senna had been sharing the same roof. He even promised her, "We'll head to the square next." On the way, Senna blurted out that her nerves were wrecking her, wondering what gift she'd get, and the protagonist just chuckled, thinking it over before saying, "Only God knows." Gio blurted out in excitement, praying the gift waiting for him would level up his adventures right as his sister clocked it too, he keeps saying. So he's basically saying, "Right." And before she can even finish, he answers straight from the heart, admitting he genuinely cares, dreaming of becoming an adventurer just like his father, pushing all the other questions aside because, yeah, he's got more to it. He even tells himself, everything's going to be fine. And then Senna speaks. She's convinced he'll land an amazing gift. She can feel it in her bones. MC. Lucy asked how she felt, still just as reckless as ever. Right, Senna chuckled, warm and easy, like it was all nothing. Hearing that, she declared she'd only be happy with her life if her brother backed her up. Then the protagonist smirked, playfully flicked her on the head, and said, told her she had no excuse to slack, lazy bones, and when he finally arrived, he leaned in and said he'd been praying for her. The moment they stepped into the prayer hall, the protagonist told her, they're already praying, come join them. He swore it was tradition, pray to the gods at sunrise and stare as the sun climbs, and right then, everything. Everyone who's in trouble gets a special blessing, and the protagonist stares at his sister as she folds her hands and prays. She shut her eyes tight and prayed like her life depended on it, begging for a blessing to guide her through her adventures. Then, out of nowhere, she heard. He heard the goddess's voice say this gift was meant for her and that once she had it, she'd give herself to him. And it wasn't just some random present, she'd hand him the vegetable garden, and the protagonist's jaw literally dropped in pure astonishment. He heard the young man in front of him snap out a loud exclaim. He did it then, a blessing crashed into his life, right when it could boost the family business, and the MC stared in shock. He'd never even heard of a blessing like that, and he could swear it wouldn't help a bit. Senna called him over and demanded to hear how it went, then his mind snapped to his sister, and he asked her straight up what gift she got. The girl leaned in and told him she'd earned the sword God's favor. The protagonist stared at her, utterly stunned, thinking, okay, that's seriously not nice to say. He yanked her by the shoulders and blurted, this is straight up amazing. The sword gift, maybe it's a rare thing. He'll back her up on her adventures, exactly like she hoped. Senna shot back, she did it. And then, he's way too close. She finally pushed him away, muttered an apology, and admitted he'd gotten nervous. Then Senna burst into laughter, because for a split second she totally thought he was about to kiss her. Once her laughter finally faded, she leaned in and asked, so how are you holding up? What did they give him? The protagonist stalled before he could answer. He begged God with all his heart to let him become an adventurer, praying for a special gift that would arm him for every wild adventure ahead. With fear clawing at his chest, he finally worked up the courage to tell her what he'd been given wasn't just anything, it was a vegetable garden. Senna asked, confused, and the MC of the vegetable garden snapped his hands over his face and blurted, "A vegetable garden that?" Right then, Annie, our protagonist's old friend, burst into hysterical laughter, wheezing out, "A vegetable garden." Between sobs and laughs, Shefa froze at the embarrassment, while the protagonist's childhood friend scolded her, "You shouldn't do that." Annie just giggled, "What's wrong?" And Shefa blurted, "That's ridiculous." The chief spilled that laughing at God's gift was punishment and plain disrespect to Gio. The siblings blinked in shock at those girls, and the protagonist froze, drowning in shame, unable to believe she actually heard him. Shefa spoke in a soothing tone. "Yeah, it's an odd little gift, but that's just how it is." So Senna backed her up, saying, "Exactly." Still, the MC couldn't stop worrying, would her brother really be able to feed her, right with this? Confused, he asked what she was even scared of, and Shefa cut in, smiling. "Everything'll be fine. I know it'll come in handy." The gift, she explained, all depended on the user. Then Annie busted out laughing again at the MC's vegetable garden, and that finally snapped him awake. He frowned, irritated, because she shouldn't be laughing at someone's misfortune. The thing is, these two weren't strangers, they were his sisters, with the kind of history you only get from childhood. Shefa arrived 3 years ago, and Annie, born a bit earlier than him, a year back, she snagged her gift at the Autumn Festival, and now the two of them are adventurers. Running wild together, Annie can track like a hunter with her nose, while Shefa carries herself with the prestige of an empress for someone her age. She'd already become a force to be reckoned with, plain and simple, so he wanted. He wanted to become an adventurer just like them, and the real reason was this. He wanted it because of Shefa, then Annie elbowed him in the side and blurted, "I'm so sorry." Turns out, he can't cut it as an adventurer with Shifa, so the protagonist snapped, furious and loud. Why would she say that? Senna and Shifa stared at him in shock, and he snapped, "No, if they catch sight of it, they'll know everything." She was drenched in sticky sweat from the strain. How would she even know? Annie burst out laughing again, and shot his sister a question. What about her gift? Could they really watch it together? Staring at Sina's gift side by side, Shifa gasped at the shocking favor of the sword god, while Annie just blinked in confusion, because she'd never even heard of something like this. But just from the name alone, that gift sounded terrifyingly strong. Senna nodded fast, thinking this would finally forge her into a real swordswoman. And Annie had been watching like she already knew, yeah. She should become an adventurer, right? So when Annie asked if Senna wanted to join their group, Senna blinked in shock and said yes. Then Annie kept going. They're scrambling for a new team member, and somehow she shows up at the perfect time, right? The girl turns to Chifa and asks, "Are you really okay with this?" Chifa answers, "Of course." She's fully on board, no hesitation at all. If it's Senna, then boom, it's settled, and the girl can't even wrap her head around what she just heard. Senna stared in shock. Sifa's group had him now, and he couldn't stop wishing he could jump in too if only someone would finally hand him a truly powerful gift for his next adventures. He felt crushed, and it tore at his sister, and when he was like that, she rushed in and called his name. She told him he'd been invited to this group, so what's the point of hesitating? Senna wanted to say. He tried to say something, but he cut her off and kept going because honestly, he doesn't think a gift like that can ever turn into real money. And he knows she's not naive enough to believe he'll bankroll her. Then the protagonist gently stroked her head and said, "Senna, you've changed so much now, you've got to toughen up and work on yourself," Shifa warned. Saying his name like a red flag, Senna looked uneasy as he lifted his hand off her head. Then he told Shifa he understood, and Senna blurted out again, "She's going to be an adventurer." After a while, she leaned toward her brother and said, "We'll see each other soon." And then she dropped her real dream stack of fortune while she's still young, then coast for the rest of her life in pure laziness. The protagonist heard that and froze in shock. That's it. That's all you want. After she left, it hit him he'd never expected to miss his sister this badly. Not until that moment besides. A wild adventure with Shefa was waiting for her, and the moment it hit, he was still crushed and seething jealous of Senna's gift. The protagonist headed for the garden, but every step dragged his mind back to the gift, so what was he really supposed to do with something like that? A gardener, what could he possibly pull off with it? If he'd understood things right, then that. That word meant a vegetable garden back home, but he never weeds a single bed. The gift is pointless because he doesn't even have a vegetable garden. The MC froze mid-thought then, out of nowhere, a voice cracked straight through his mind. A voice boomed in his head, asking if he wanted to use this plot for his vegetable garden. He had no clue what was going on. Then he spotted a glowing patch of land right in front of him. Panic ripped through him. What in the world was happening? Was he losing it? Seeing things? Or hallucinating? And wait, there's nobody else here, right? Where did that voice even come from, and why was that corner of the ground flashing like it was alive? He heard it again, pitching the idea of tossing it aside to turn into a vegetable garden, and the protagonist just froze in pure shock because those voices kept coming back. Was it all stuck inside his head? He stared at that glowing patch and wondered if he should shove the whole idea aside and plant a vegetable garden instead because fear was gnawing at him, and after a while, he just didn't know what to do. The protagonist made his choice, and the voice shoved the final word into his head again. He'd already set that decision aside for a vegetable garden, and right in front of him, the soil in that spot darkened. Surprise hit like a thunderclap. What was happening? The MC dropped to his knees and pressed his hand to the ground, shocked to find the soil so soft it felt unreal. Was this really happening, like a whole field, like a garden, appearing out of nowhere in an instant? He muttered, "Okay, so what's next?" At that exact moment, a system window snapped into the air, flashing details Gio's vegetable garden, level 1 and 0 skills. The protagonist froze totally stunned standing there as a home garden of... A voice hit him with, "Want to start growing it," and the system instantly flashed a menu of choices: wheat, potatoes, tomatoes, garlic, cucumbers, barley, carrots, eggplant, bok choy, turnips, pumpkin, lettuce, and green peppers. Everything felt painfully average, and the MC froze in confusion, so at least he could pick which crops to grow here, and he decided to just do it. Then he spots a start button hanging in midair, like it's waiting for him. Maybe I have to pick my crop with that, he thinks. So the protagonist snaps into action, chooses potatoes, and slams the start button. The system voice immediately cuts in. Want to grow potatoes? Then it demands he pick the quantity and where to plant them. Once he nailed every question the system threw at him, it ordered that 150 vegetables be grown, and they'd have to be planted all the way at the far end. A system flared to life, spotlighting the exact spot he needed, and shot him a question. "Is this the right place?" Shocked, the protagonist nodded and said, "Yes." A voice cut in. He'd started growing potatoes. Gio's eyes widened with a surprised grin, like, "Wait, you're growing them already," but he hadn't even planted a single seed. He laughed and said, "Growing vegetables is a breeze," then shook his head, "No way, that's true." Then he thought, "Wait, you can really grow them this way, and it costs nothing." He's got to switch it up and plant other crops 1 seed per square, yet this field stretches 50 squares, so he needs to pick 10 different varieties. He lined up 5 squares each, hit his goal, and blurted, "Okay, that's it," because they all look the same anyway. But it looks like he's wrapped it up still. This is a DVR, right? He didn't get it at all. So guess what? He'll have to keep coming back here to figure out how everything's going. And then right when he least expected. A tiny sprout shot up from the dirt, and in just an hour, his garden exploded into a breathtaking vegetable patch. His jaw dropped so hard he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Was it really that easy? A normal farmer would need months, so was this what his gift was really doing? He brushed the vegetables with his fingers and realized, wow, there were tons of them, and every single one looked fresh and tasted amazing, like the protagonist had just hit the jackpot. Beganis stared at the chance to harvest them and wondered if he could pull it off. Then a voice snapped, asking if he wanted to harvest them. He stared in shock. Could she really be reading his thoughts? Then he snapped out of it and decided not to waste time over it right now. And the voice confirmed it. Yeah, it was true. He wanted to harvest them, and the moment he said it, and right then, the vegetables started sliding together, stacking into cups and piling into baskets like they had a mind of their own. Gio was absolutely stunned somehow. The vegetables had all gathered together. They basically exposed themselves like on purpose. Fast as lightning, every last container got filled with the harvest. Harvest. The protagonist scanned everything, then dropped to his knees. He stared at his own hand in shock, blinking like he couldn't believe it. Then he remembered that voice in his head and the land getting plowed in the blink of an eye. Cryptic symbols that looked like level and skill, and crops that shot up at an unreal speed. No planting needed, just boom after boom of these impossible things, one after another. Culminating in vegetables tearing free and harvesting themselves, then a basket popped into his hands before he even had time to blink. Then it hit him how ridiculously convenient it all was, and now he was grinning with pure delight. Now that he'd finally cooled down, the protagonist poked the vegetables with his own hands, trying to figure out if they were actually safe to eat. MC snatched up a tomato and started inspecting it up close, then caught himself, because it looked like the kind of ordinary, mouth-watering tomato you'd swear was delicious. As he took that bite, pure joy lit up his face. It was absolutely delicious, so he leaned in, took a hard bite, and then examined it like he couldn't believe what he was tasting. He clocked how that veggie's insides were packed tight with a bunch of smooth gelatin like bits sweet as fruit, but then it hit you with a sharp, acidic bite. He grabbed a few more fruits, bit in, and grinned. Yeah, these were the real deal, all top quality, Like, he could have devoured every last one, and it was honestly mind-blowing. Maybe it wasn't just tomatoes either. Maybe other vegetables were just as incredible. Meanwhile, Senna and her crew finally burst into the spot. Senna burst out with pure delight. Wow, these meadows are unreal. Shefa then leaned in and said, "There's a dungeon nearby, ruled by none other than Lord Arcel." The adventurers pushed deeper, and she warned them this labyrinth was crawling with demons, but if they survived, it could hand them valuable materials. Adventurers plunged into dungeons for a get-rich-quick payday, while Senna practically burst with joy because she'd never left the city before. Annie cooled her excitement, admitting she was brand new, but telling Senna she'd get the hang of it by fighting monsters, then added, since she'd never even held a sword before, why not practice right now? Senna said she'd give it a shot. The girl yanked out her sword and blurted, "I bought this yesterday." Shefa smirked. "Not bad," and Annie immediately figured if Senna got a sword as a gift, then she'd better level up fast. She snatched her sword and in one sharp thought lit up the demon's presence inside her mind. Right then, a goblin burst into view. Shefa's eyes went wide with alarm goblins. How many were there? Annie tried to calm her down. Don't freak out, just one. And honestly, it felt like exactly the kind of trial a budding adventurer needed. Senna's eyes snapped to the girl as she demanded, "Get down to business and gear up." Then her sister charged in and swung her sword with enough force. Annie gasped, "Wait, what was that?" Shefa could only stare, because it all happened so fast she didn't even get a glimpse of the weapon. Senna burst into joyful laughter and yelled, "Is this really that amazing? With this, I can kill a goblin." So the girl braced herself, then bolted straight for her opponent right when Annie screamed in panic and Shefa shot her a warning it wasn't safe to charge in like that, alone. Senna told them, "Don't worry about me." She was sure she could handle him and beat him herself. The goblin snatched one of her projectiles and hurled it straight at her, and Annie gasped and fought back by throwing one of her own then. Chifa blurted a warning to Senna, and when confusion hit, she snapped her sword up as a shield. She snapped up to deflect the enemy's swing, and when the projectile ricocheted off her blade, she screamed at the impact. Now she's about to pay for it. This young adventurer snapped her sword through the air and decapitated the monster in a single, brutal second. Her allies were left completely speechless after witnessing what just went down. Senna spun toward them and yelled, "We did it." They did it. This is their victory. Annie shot a stunned look, completely unable to believe it. But the nerve to face a monster all by himself, She flicked her sword out with split-second power and razor-quick vision, and used it to deflect the throne stone like a blur summoning the spirit's fury. A spirit so ruthless, it could end a living creature without a second thought, even a demon, and on top of that, her sword skills were terrifyingly deadly. Senna, meanwhile, snatched up the goblin's dropped attribute and demanded to know what it was, and the moment he saw it, his brain went, "Wait, I think it is." That night, it looked like they'd just unleashed a brand new talent. Center burst back home and yelled to the protagonist, "I'm back already." He burst into delight the moment he saw her, told her dinner was just ready. Then the protagonist leaned in and asked how her first adventure went. She grinned and said it was fun. Even as the fight with that demon MC noticed, really. It hit him all at once. He whipped around, stunned, and blurted, "Wait, what was that? Out of nowhere? Is she okay? Is she unhurt?" Senna just laughed and told him she was perfectly fine. She propped her chin on her hands, stared him down, and said, dead serious, "You're worrying way too much. My sisters are right here, and demons are weak." It was her first time wielding a sword, and the moment she gripped it, the power felt right, just like he'd noticed before he couldn't shake it. Maybe this was her gift, and he hated how much he envied her. She dropped a plate of food onto her own and grinned. Yup, this is her reward for pulling off her first win. Senna lit up and blurted, "Wow, stew." The protagonist grinned to himself today. He finally cooked with garden vegetables, so at least they won't have to stretch like they're starving even if there's still basically no meat. MC leaned in, wished his sister bon appetit, and couldn't stop wondering what that stew actually tasted like. She took a bite, then froze, eyes wide as the flavor hit. Meanwhile, the protagonist leaned in, all nerves, blurting, What is it?" The girl blinked up at him, eyes shining with pure admiration, and burst out that it was insanely delicious. She leaned in and asked what stew this was, and when he told her, the mountain of veggies hit so good that the protagonist grinned and answered her. He shot back, "Yeah, today is different," and she nodded like she'd been waiting for it. Too, even the stew felt weirdly special, and he couldn't stop smiling as he realized he had to try the dish for himself now. After that first spoonful, his whole face lit up. This was actually delicious. Senna devoured her dinner and practically raved, saying it was so rich and sweet she'd never had vegetables taste this good. Then the protagonist nodded, shocked that it was on a whole different level from the veggies he'd eaten before. His sister wouldn't stop gushing. Everything here sounded unreal, and every bite was apparently pure joy. He told her he was relieved she was happy. Then, at last, Senna leaned in and asked him, "Wait, what's going on with these? Where did you even get these vegetables?" The protagonist shot the question at her, then asked if she wanted him to spill the details. He was seconds away from confessing his experiment to her when his sister burst in and cut him off. She cut him off mid-sentence, demanding more, and the protagonist blushed so hard it hurt because thinking she'd actually listen to him was plain foolish. After dinner, she rubbed her belly and groaned, "I ate way too much," and he shot back, "Come here just for a minute," then started explaining. After a while, Gio finally let her out into his garden and Senna gasped, staring at it in shock, a whole yard full of plants. Gio just shrugged and said, "Yep, the veggies we ate today were picked right here." She stared in disbelief. What was he even talking about? Was it the power of his gift? The protagonist shot back, "Yeah, it can do that." He figured it would cut their food costs. His sister burst out, overwhelmed. Wow, from now on, she can chow down on that delicious food every single day. Then he stares at her, totally stunned. And he figured this gift would light up his life, finally giving him something that'd power his adventures. "Still, look at his garden, it's unreal," he said, and then he went right ahead and stuffed himself with food like he couldn't stop. Senna let out a bright, joyful laugh, already craving the taste just from imagining it. A stone slipped out of her pocket and thumped onto the garden bed, and the protagonist snapped, eyes wide. "What's that supposed to mean?" The girl shot back that it was a magic stone she'd snagged on her adventure today, and he just let out a chuckle, then a voice cut in, "So, do you want to use it?" This item, the protagonist's eyes snapped wide with surprise. "Use it," picking. He grabbed the stone and turned to his sister, firing the question, "A magic stone is just frozen magical power, right?" And she stared at him like he'd lost his mind, asking back, "Yes." Agreed. So what was he really planning to do with it? He set that stone down on the crop plot with care, and then the voice claimed he'd used it. Then Gio couldn't help but stare, stunned, thinking, what a crazy ability. What would happen this time? He never once imagined it would hit this fast just like that. Everything changed. A whole tree loaded with meat sprouted right in front of his eyes, and it looked downright unreal. It was just a normal tree big as can be, but it wasn't what drew the eye because there was something strange going on instead. Instead of fruit, chunks of meat dangled from the branches. His jaw dropped so hard it barely recovered. He finally got it. His gift wasn't just magic. It was a veggie garden, letting him conjure thriving fields and harvest mouth-watering goodness like it was nothing. After he used the magic stone, a meat tree erupted from the ground. What on earth is this, and what kind of crazy gift was it supposed to be, especially later on? Senna and her crew were battling monsters in a dungeon just outside. After yet another brutal fight, she let out a shaky breath and snapped, "I'm done. I'm tired of all these demons." Annie snapped that they'd been wiped out in the blink of an eye, so no one has to worry about danger anymore. And Shifa shot back that if Seneca can take it, they're in the clear. She's already geared up for serious research. The protagonist's sister burst out that she'd found a magic stone and she was grabbing it for herself. Annie blinked in shock. A stone, seriously? She figured something that tiny couldn't be worth much. Then Senna burst out laughing and said, "It's a souvenir for her older brother, Fergio." Shefa asked how he was holding up, but on the day of the descent, he looked rough, and he said, "He's dying to become an adventurer, but his gift just won't cut it, and now I can't help wondering if he's still stuck in a bad place." Shefa admitted she's a little worried, while Senna shot back, "Everything's fine." So he stayed home, yeah, and things were about to go sideways. Her brother is insanely gifted. He can take over the world. Then the allies froze, staring at her like she'd just dropped a bomb. Because what the hell was she even talking about? The whole world, including the garden, would be plunged into chaos later on. Later, when Senna finally made it home, she grabbed her brother and told him everything that happened, right then. Something must have startled him so hard he shot upright like he'd been burned, blurting out, "So does Shefa want to swing by sometime?" The girl spotted it, and Annie did too. Then he snapped into a full-blown panic, tearing around the house, shouting that they had to clean up right now. Pure excitement hit him like a wave. Shifa hadn't been to his house in what felt like forever. He wanted to make her smile, but she just stared back with a blank, calm face, so he couldn't read a single thing she was feeling still. She stayed cool and sweet. But she didn't laugh like Annie did. He clutched his head, spiraling. What if he couldn't bring Shefa joy? Worse, what if she felt let down? Senna, staring at him as he paced, snapped, irritated, from the side. The protagonist screeched to a stop and demanded to know what was wrong, and she snapped back that she wanted him to finally listen, because her sisters were coming over with one mission: to see their garden. The protagonist kept replaying it in his head: gardens, calm as they come, and the thought, what if they'd be happier if he showed them the produce? Then his sister smiled and swore they would, because the stuff was just that delicious. He figured, Senna looks so blissful every time she eats, so maybe Shifa will too, MC blurted out. He blurted that out, and if it's really true, he's going to level up the garden even more. Senna shot back with a loud, admiring cry, matching his excitement. After a while, the siblings finally reached the garden and stood there, awestruck, staring at the meat tree. The protagonist pondered it, and suddenly this garden didn't look ordinary at all. Senna suddenly remembered, shot her hand out toward the protagonist and said, "Here, more magic stones for you." The protagonist lit up with pure joy. He was seconds away from leveling up when the system blared that he'd hit level 2 vegetable garden area 100 out of 100. But despite that, he had 0 skills, so he figured he could jack up the garden level with magic stones, expanding the area and boosting crop growth, so everything could grow bigger and stronger. So yeah, that's how it went. Now he could grow meat, and the moment he laid the stones on the plot, he had no clue what was about to hit him, so for now, he just had one move level up. A voice shot the question at him, "Want to use the magic stone?" He didn't hesitate, yes. All of them. Senna froze, stunned. Who in the world was her brother talking to? She slid into the seat beside him, and the voice snapped his secret to the surface. He'd started using magic stones, and she couldn't help but gasp in shock. They just kept vanishing. Why? 10 seconds later, the system pinged him and told him he was already level 3. Pure joy hit him instantly. His voice promised he could finally widen the land and grow fresh crops. He couldn't wait, so he went straight to find out what he could get his hands on now. After he studied everything, his jaw dropped. So these were just plain old vegetables now. Burdock, perilla, sweet potato, he'd never even heard those names. The MC spun to his sister and asked, "Have you heard of these?" She stared at him, totally confused. Like, what are you talking about? The protagonist shot back, "Of course Senna doesn't know." And his sister snapped, irritated. "Did you have to ask like that? Is this some kind of exotic food? Dude, if they can harvest something like that, imagine what could happen, so the protagonist decides they should grow it themselves first." Moments later, Senna blurted out, "New vegetables," and the protagonist shot back, "Yep, our garden's grown," just as they sat there. He drops down beside the fresh crop, staring at it like it's messing with him. So is this a sweet potato or just some wild variation? Senna dared him to taste it, and once it hit the heat, the veggies turned a shocking purple. Totally shocking the protagonist, he said it was all about the flavor of the ingredients they used to steam the potatoes. Santa took one bite of the new vegetable and instantly lit up because it was downright delicious. She gushed about how sweet it was and how the texture was just perfect. Then the protagonist took one bite, paused, and snapped. "This potato isn't a vegetable, it's..." Senna tore into the potato like it was the main event, then gasped, "This is incredible, what a gift." She'd never tasted anything like it, so wild it blew her mind, and when the protagonist heard her, he smiled and said, "Use that magic stone and I'll whip up even more." Senna chewed her food, then casually said she'd go grab something else. Gio snapped in surprise like, "Wait, the lazy one's actually motivated." Was it the garden calling his name? Yep, and it kept going. She dragged him stones, and he leveled up his garden on the spot. With his level climbing too, he unlocked the whole craft of gardening, then bam! Something snagged his attention. He leaned in close and stared at the system message. Then days later, the moment of his friend's visit finally crashed in, and Shefa bowed as she said, "Please forgive them for disturbing you," while Annie just prayed they'd make it on time. The protagonist shot back that everything was totally fine, then Senna burst out, "Come in, you're always welcome here." Gio stared at Shifa and swore an angel had just crash-landed into their home. Pulling the girls inside, he leaned toward Shifa and told her she'd been incredibly sweet to drop by and visit them like this. She shot back with a sarcastic apology like, "Yeah, I'm here too," and the protagonist snapped, "Please, forgive him, he didn't even notice you." Then the girl burst into laughter and goaded, "So you want to die?" And MC just said. He blurted out that he really hoped there wouldn't be any disappointment. Then Annie shot. Senna said it's amazing, and she rushed over to prove it. Gio stared in shock. "Senna," Shifa chimed in. "Yeah, she really said that." And Senna swore his garden would be a huge hit. The protagonist panicked, face hot. "Wait, what? No, I didn't go that far. Senna's just exaggerating." Annie shot him a sarcastic look, really, and there was no way she was buying that. A vegetable garden of all things, it's almost unbelievable. The girl strode straight toward the plot, locked in as if nothing could stop her. When the girls laid eyes on the protagonist's handiwork, their astonishment exploded past any limit. Annie blurted, "Whoa, wait, what is this?" A whole garden, then the girls leapt into action, eyeing every single crop like it might reveal a secret. Stepping in awe, drinking in the wild variety of crops and vegetables. Even the vegetables and fruits weren't the weird part, there were legit mushrooms here too. And somehow, everything was thriving like crazy. Senna even pointed out that there was this gorgeous fence now, because this garden used to look way more shabby. Gabby, she froze in shock when it showed up, and Annie blurted at the protagonist, wide-eyed, "Is this all your work?" He nodded and said, "Yeah, it was." Right then, it hit him at level 5. He'd unlocked the fence making skill. Now he could slap up a fence around his garden in a blink, blocking strangers from staring into the house from outside. Annie admitted, almost in disbelief, that she had totally misjudged him, and it never once crossed her mind that someone could build a fence that gorgeous so quickly. Then she stared at the garden and said no. She meant that none of these plants care about the seasons or the environment because they just thrive anyway. She'd never seen crops like these before, and Senna blurted, "Isn't that wildly unusual?" while Annie practically shouted, "Annie!" "I don't know what it is, but it looks delicious," the protagonist thought, grinning because just the other day she'd mocked his gift. And now he couldn't wrap his head around it. She looked genuinely shocked, and he realized Shifa was. Always impassive, like it could never feel a thing, so was she bored or was someone forcing her to pretend? Or maybe it was disappointment creeping in. Then MC asked. He pressed her for her thoughts, and she just stared in total amazement. She's absolutely stunned, and honestly, it's glorious. The protagonist practically burst with joy in his head because he did surprise her, but maybe she was only trying to be polite. He told them that if they wanted, they could go ahead and try something from their garden. She leaned in and asked if that could really happen, then thanked him like it mattered. He started to weigh it, but deep down, he knew the real best was still on the horizon. Annie said, "So we're really doing this?" MC nodded and told her yes because the harvest was nearly here. He guided them to his trees and broke into laughter as he introduced them, like it was the funniest thing in the world. And that's when they found the meat just hanging there like it shouldn't be real, and the girl's shock was non-stop as everyone stared at the tree, totally stunned. "Wilderment," Annie blurted out. Was she losing it? Shefa stared and said, "No joke, it looks like there's real meat hanging from the trees." The protagonist said, "Yeah, I was surprised too at first." And when Annie, shaken by his calm tone, asked him why he was talking about it so quietly, he just stared her down. "Wait, what is that supposed to be? Meat doesn't grow on trees," the protagonist insisted, but with his gift, it actually could, and Annie couldn't shake the shock at all. "So what kind of strange power is that?" Senna blurted, stunned. "Does meat really grow on trees?" The protagonist grinned and said his garden's fruits were insanely good, so yeah, he was going to pick every last bit of it. Just give him a minute. Annie swore she'd gone crazy, staring straight at it right before her eyes. The produce started regrouping like it had a plan, and even the meat began to wriggle. She yelped, "Wait, he's got a basket. The meat just leaps right in." The protagonist stayed cool and said, "That's insanely convenient, isn't it?" Then he broke down in tears. He snapped in outrage. "This isn't about convenience, it's about... So what is this thing? Really, what the hell is happening in this garden?" The girls stared at the meat piled in the basket like it was about to decide their fate. It looked insanely fresh and mouth-watering. Gio even suggested the girls throw a barbecue for today. Senna jumped at his offer full of excitement. Annie stared at him, dumbfounded. "Just wait," she asked, like she couldn't believe it. "Can they really eat this?" she questioned Shefa, her voice doubtful. MC thought, even if the meat tasted amazing, there's no way she'd ever bite it. Something about how it was made felt seriously wrong. Shefa shot back, "Yeah, I want to try it." The protagonist couldn't believe his ears, and neither could Annie. "Seriously?" she blurted, staring in shock. "It's meat from a tree." Shefa flashed a grin at her partner and said, "Don't sweat it, Gio sent this as a gift." The protagonist practically exploded with joy hearing her say that. The girl snapped her head toward the protagonist and offered to jump in, and the MC, still stunned, asked her to cut the meat, but she smirked and told him, "Leave it to me," because she couldn't wait for that barbecue. Shifa then turned to Senna and pitched in, and Annie stared at her happy allies in pure confusion until she finally said she'd help them too. The protagonist begged her to watch the vegetables, and she snapped back, "I'll grab them right now." Then she blurted, "Oh no, those things are moving on their own," and all the friends started drooling. Senna kept her eyes on the sizzling meat, then blurted, "That smells amazing," and the protagonist nodded like, "All right, I think it's ready, let's try it." His sister shot her hand up and yelled, "Excellent, bon appetit, everyone." The protagonist nodded and said, "Okay, Senna goes first, after that." But he handed the meat to Shifa and snapped, "Be careful," because it was blazing hot. Shifa thanked him, and Annie. Still, he hesitated and asked Shefa if she was really sure about this Shefa instead of. Without answering, he shoved the food right to her mouth. MC clung to a silent, shaking breath. There was no way he could even. I can't even imagine the look on her face after she chomps down on a piece of meat. "Meat," Shifa blurted out, stunned, and the taste hit so hard it's downright addictive. The protagonist burst into joy, then froze in shock at how surprised she felt. Senna beamed at Shifa, practically floating on excitement. "Tell me you love it, right?" Because Annie couldn't stop staring. Like, how could something be that sweet, Gio? He grinned sheepishly and said he was so happy she liked it. Then she replied that she'd never tasted meat this delicious in her life. Senna burst into laughter and told Annie to give it a try, so Annie took a bite. Still skeptical, he couldn't believe how soft it felt and how insanely good the texture was. After one bite, she tore into the meat like she'd been starved, blurting out how insanely delicious it was and swearing she couldn't believe something that good grew on a tree. The protagonist stared, stunned, like she was watching magic happen right in front of her eyes. The girl shut her eyes with pure bliss and blurted out that both beef and pork were delicious. Then Shefa jumped in, saying vegetables and mushrooms belonged in the mix too, and Senna shouted, "She struts in like she owns the place, thinking she can wipe out everything on this table, and then the protagonist, plate in hand, hypes the guests up, desserts on too, if you want it." Craved it sweet potato pie, and the sister burst out, absolutely thrilled. "Wow, this looks seriously delicious," Annie blurted out. "Sweet potato." She'd never heard of it, she gasped, shooting a startled look from the garden too. And the second the guest took a bite of the dessert, every single one of them nodded in total agreement. He couldn't stop smiling because it was insanely delicious. She'd never tasted anything like it, pure magic on her tongue, and Shifa was on the verge of losing it. Senna lit up with pure joy, one bite of that pie, and it tasted sweeter than honey, and she burst into happy tears like a kid. That adventurer with the huntress's gift swore it tasted amazing and even claimed he could pluck it straight from his own garden, so Shefa and Senna begged for another slice of dessert. The protagonist happily served them, and he couldn't help thinking, sweets really are a hit with girls, huh? She watched her buddies tear into the pie like it was pure gold, burst out laughing, and told them, "I told you so." And yeah, her brother's gift really is just incredible. The girls nodded along instantly, no doubts, no hesitation. Later, the protagonist and Shifa slipped aside to catch their breath. He told the girl, "This garden is incredible, you've got every kind of fresh produce and it tastes even better," and the girl couldn't help but be amazed. She told him, like it was the most mind-blowing truth, that God had blessed him with a gift so incredible. Then she met his eyes, smiled, and said, "Honestly, it's just amazing." MC was basically unraveling in real time, stunned she could grin at him like that. He said he'd never been happier and that he did it for her, no one else. Shifa's smile snapped off her face, and bewilderment flooded in as she demanded an answer from him. Her face burned, she got flustered, then started denying his words like they were impossible. He told them, "There's still plenty left, so don't hold back, dig in." Shifa thanked him, but deep down, he wasn't sure he could keep them entertained the way they deserved. And when he saw those girls smiling, he knew his gift had lit up their hearts. He could even catch Shifa's smile, but he couldn't get the words out. If he could have pulled that off without his garden, then that power is just unreal. Annie finished the prepared dishes and said, "Even if the produce tastes amazing, is it really enough?" "Wait, can someone really grow that big and actually eat it all?" Gio shot back, and he knew his sister could eat a ton, but even she couldn't swallow it all, and he figured it out after they started growing fast, way too fast, and in huge amounts. He and his sister couldn't fit all that stuff, so he stared him down, then said, "Hey, she wants to ask you something. Do you think she could grab some of the garden's produce to use in their restaurant?" Senna blurted in shock as she questioned a restaurant still baffled. The protagonist just stood there, stunned, staring at the place her parents ran. When he finally showed up later at the spot they agreed on, he froze because outside the restaurant, a huge crowd had gathered, and even at lunch, there was already a line so long it cut off his sentence. A massive line stretched out forever, then bam! Right then and there, two breathtaking beauties in daring outfits showed up Mars. Marsa and Lita burst out of the restaurant and started pulling everyone in with their invitations. He drove the idea to pull in even more customers, and just like that, the MC finally understood everything clicked. If you leaned in, you'd see every single one of those. Every customer in this place was a man, then Mars slid up, winked at him, and challenged him to play. Playfully, she turned to him and asked, "What about you?" his sister. Mr. tells him, "Come eat at our place," and expects him to go. He looked utterly lost and then snapped, refusing the girl's invitation outright. Invitation. Right then, Annie snapped his name and called out to him, all irritation and attitude. They cornered him and demanded, "What are you dodging?" then pushed him toward the business meeting. But he muttered that he knew he just wanted to take a peek. Right then, Marcia laughed, waved him off, and practically begged him to come back and visit again. He knew Annie's house sat right across the street, like it was practically daring him to look. He told her he didn't even know a new restaurant had opened nearby, so his curiosity took over. The allies closed in on Lucas's restaurant because it doubled as Annie's parents' home too. He walked in and asked the girl, "Is it still open?" And she shot back that their restaurant used to be way more prosperous. But not long ago, a rival showed up and they snatched their customers away. The protagonist sank in grief, thinking, He used to come here with Senna all the time, and now it's heartbreaking to see this place so empty, so abandoned. And Annie kept going sure enough. Their father had vanished for a long time, and Annie was always off somewhere too, while her sister tried her hardest to hold everything together. He blurted, wide-eyed, "Alicia, I knew you'd been helping out at the restaurant." She'd been holding down that restaurant for ages, always kind, always strong, and then, right in that moment, he finally heard Alicia apologize. For making them wait, they got hauled up and called out, and then just like that, their group was welcomed inside the restaurant. She spun around the moment she heard her voice, and the look on her face was unreal. Absolutely wrecked with embarrassment over the girl's appearance. Annie snapped at her sister with pure rage. She snapped at her to change her outfit, and Alicia, completely unbothered, shot back at her sister with raw, furious anger. That next-door restaurant is bleeding money, so to beat them, they've gotta. He couldn't believe it. She was standing there naked, but still somehow dressed in an apron, and Annie snapped, "This makes me so sad she's already beautiful." Alicia smiled and struck a bold, playful pose, then leaned in and asked the protagonist, "So how do you like it?" But EMC froze for a moment. She blushed, admitted it was totally new for her, and then couldn't stop gushing because she honestly looked insanely amazing. Amazing, Annie snapped with rage, blurted that she was truly sorry, then this plan. Her plan was doomed from the start. She jabbed her sister with a finger and snapped that she didn't exactly have a well-developed figure. Figure she couldn't seduce a man who had nothing to lose. Alicia crumpled to the floor in pure shame and broke into tears. Tears blazing in her eyes, she snapped, "There's nothing I can do about it." And then Annie's gonna have to dress like that too, she snapped, all sharp attitude. "What am I even hearing right now?" she muttered, totally lost. She didn't want any part of it until Alicia grinned and told her her figure would be the kind of sensation everyone would be talking about, and it would be everything. Annie shot back in fury, "I don't want this either," and the embarrassed protagonist couldn't help thinking, doesn't she get it? Doesn't she understand? Annie stared at him, cheeks burning with shame, and blurted that she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd just said. He didn't imagine it, not even for a second. While the protagonist hunted for the answer, the girl jabbed him with a burst of pain. Painfully, he's on the side, and Alicia says with a heavy sigh, "Of course Annie is an adventure, and she should be the one running the restaurant," because Annie was absolutely furious. Wait, what was she even talking about? That place mattered to her so much, and now she's desperate to help too. But if they really wanted to focus on the food, they had no reason to go that far. Alicia nailed it. There was no fancy standout menu at all, and the restaurant was ridiculously plain, like it didn't even try. And if things kept going like this, the restaurant they inherited from their father was about to go under, and the protagonist felt their anger crash down like a tidal wave. He couldn't wrap his head around how wrecked Alicia was. This mattered to both of them, and even Annie too, for a second. He pictured the two of them back here again, and he couldn't wait to see the sisters' faces light up with happiness. He clenched his fist like he meant it and snapped to them with pure conviction. Then the protagonist told Alicia, show that Annie had begged him to meet her here today. He truly believed his gift could save them, and for a second, he actually dared to hope that he was the only one who could come crashing in and save their restaurant. The bag he hauled along, and when the protagonist tipped it open, Alicia's eyes blew wide. She gasped in shock at what was inside. "Yeah, there are tons of ingredients in there," Kempsey said. "Every single one came straight from my garden." Annie burst out, thrilled, then she took a taste right away. And yeah, every last bite was amazing. Alicia leaned in, inspected those fruits and veggies up close, and straight up said they were fresh and top quality because she'd never, ever seen anything like them before. She couldn't stop staring at the burdock and perilla, so she blurted out, "What are those?" Gio broke it all down, and when she leaned into the bag, Alicia gasped in. "Wait, what's that? Is it really rice?" His eyes went wide as he demanded, "Rice. Rice. Oh yeah." She'd heard the name plenty of times, but she'd never actually laid eyes on it. Her sister finally told her it was real, and that it was rare as hell around here. Annie realized it wasn't being harvested here, and it hardly ever showed up from other countries either. She even remembered spotting it at the market once. And that was it. So when the protagonist saw it, he was genuinely stunned. Like, wait, just how rare is this stuff? Alicia stared at the rice in her palm and said, "Wait, it doesn't look shiny and white unless it's supposed to?" The protagonist blinked, totally lost. "So that's how it's meant to be," Alicia replied, "because when he harvested it the usual way, it ended up exactly like this." So it was polished rice, and Alicia stared in disbelief, firing off questions like, "What kind of garden is this? How did you even gather ingredients like that?" Annie snapped, "That's outrageous." And "Wait, do you mean they literally grow meat on trees there?" Her sister blurted, "Is this a normal garden or what?" She shot back, "Yeah, what else were they gonna do?" The girl snapped them back to work, and she pressed Alicia, asking why she didn't start cooking something with those ingredients. She said, with a heavy heart, that she never wanted her sister to end up like those shady touts at the restaurant next door, and Alicia just smiled back. She replied that she'd find a way to thank them, and the moment the girl got her hands on that generous gift, she sprang into action, her fingers flashing with practiced skill, no hesitation at all. The protagonist muttered, "That's true mastery," Alicia shot back. "Yeah, Lucas might be the mistress, so I don't exactly go flashing my skills like that." The real trouble was the rice, and right then, Annie burst in, called her over, shoved the book into her hands, and shouted, "I found this in my father's room. This book taught you how to cook rice." Alicia lit up because they finally had a real recipe, and listen, you can't eat it raw, it turns tough and flavorless, and Annie didn't know that. Alicia cracked open the book and blurted, "So what's all this?" Like she couldn't believe they'd finally learned how to eat it the right way, and then she rattled off the recipe like a poem, and Annie blinked like, "Wait, is that a spell? Is this made with magic?" The sister shook her head and said, "No, I can't really explain it. It's all about tweaking the heat. Try it yourselves." She jumped into cooking and told them, "Pour in lots of water, then stir," and right after that, she explained out loud what to do next. She stared in disbelief as the rice scorched to ashes, and the heartbreak hit hard after trying again and again. Her patience finally snapped. She was completely out of rice. Bryce froze in shock, then blurted, "So fast?" And right then the protagonist told them, "I brought more." More hungry, Alicia shoved the rice back on the stove and let it cook. While she waited, her mind kept screaming, "How's this one going to end?" Right at the end, she yanked the lid off the pot. Annie blurted out, "It smells amazing," and the whole street came running because Alicia's thrilled scream lit it up. Finally, they nailed it, the plan actually worked, and after some time, the restaurant next door. The restaurant was packed to the brim. William leaned in and told his friend, "I'm starving, aren't we up yet?" His friend shot back, "Hold on, stay cool, she'll be the one who serves you, and it'll be worth the wait." William nodded. But hunger kept gnawing at him, and he couldn't help but wonder. Stunned, he realized that mouth-watering smell wasn't just there, it was pulling him in. Alicia swept in with a tray of food, greeted them like it was nothing, and then asked if they wanted to grab a bite with Lucas. Everyone in the line whipped their heads toward her, stunned. William couldn't stop staring. He thought she was a real beauty. Then Alicia chimed in that they had a brand new menu. Right then, Annie burst out in her uniform, and the protagonist stared in shock. "Wait, what's wrong with your outfit?" Annie shrugged it off and said she was helping her sister today, so she put together a special uniform to make sure her sister wouldn't look out of place, and she totally didn't mention the fight she and her sister had over every detail. Everyone over at that place across the way was gaping in disbelief. Was there really a restaurant right across the street? They loved their waitress, she smelled straight up amazing, and William and his friend marched over to the girls. Then William asked Alicia, "Can we place an order?" The girl flashed a smile like it was obvious. Step by step, they snatched every table away. The protagonist marched over with William and his friend's food, thanked them for holding tight, then announced, loud and proud, exactly what they'd ordered. Perilla leaves are rolled up tight with juicy meat and crunchy burdock roots, and they're served alongside. They chow down on potato salad, thick veggie soup, and fluffy boiled rice because this is their place's signature set meal. William's jaw dropped as he locked eyes on the tray of food, staring like it was magic rice. His friend blurted it out in shock because this was the first time they'd ever seen it. How in the world could some ordinary place pull off a rarity like that? MC couldn't help but wonder what it would taste like. He was certain they'd love it all, because the two had poured their hearts into preparing it. And just to make it sweeter, everything in his garden had been growing there, right on his own doorstep. Then William tasted the rice. William shot up in shock. "What is this?" Because it was straight up insanely delicious and his. His friend gushed that it was insanely soft and fluffy, then the more he chewed, the richer it got, until it was straight up delicious. Really, he even confessed that the salad and soup were something special too, and that this meat was no exception. William added it with a grin, and those perilla leaves burst in fresh and crisp, giving the dish a bold, unforgettable piquant flavor. That burdock felt so perfectly soft and smooth that his joy exploded like it couldn't possibly get any better. Rice and every meat and vegetable feast he could get his hands on, he just kept devouring it, bite after bite. Devouring it like there was no end. He'd never tasted anything like this in his life, and this place. The whole place was unreal then. Just a few minutes later, he snapped awake and gasped his rice was completely gone. Annie slid him a brand new dish, and he froze, staring at it like he'd just witnessed a miracle. She grinned at him and said, "And yeah, he can chow down on as much rice as he wants right here." Both boys just stared, stunned to the core those. Leaning over at the neighboring restaurant, he caught the customer's voice. Customers at Lucas were shouting for seconds, louder and louder. And everyone decided to head there, only the sisters had already slipped past it. totally forgetting. This was the biggest rush their place had ever seen. Every single seat got snatched up, and people just kept piling in, demanding tables. Annie, Alicia, and the protagonist were barely holding it together. Chasing down every order, he watched the whole place light up, people gushing over the food, swearing they'd never tasted anything like it. Right then, William whirled toward Gio and demanded an extra dish, and the protagonist jumped on it, eyes flicking to Alicia, who was practically glowing with happiness. He thought, I get it, she's busy, but man, she looks so thrilled. Then he grabbed the extra order and carried it straight to William and his friend. Dude, after he tried it, he lit up and said, this stuff is crazy good. His friend then pressed, where did you even get those ingredients? Because they were obviously the kind of rare finds you just don't come across every day. So good, our protagonist couldn't contain himself. He blurted out how happy he was that they liked everything, and then he was ready to say the next thing. He started telling them about his garden, but Annie bulldozed in, shushed him with a wave, and MC instantly went quiet. William pulled him aside and asked what was wrong, but Gio shook his head and swore everything was okay, no problems, nothing to worry about. William wiped his plate clean and blurted out, I didn't know a spot this amazing was even around here. The place across the street is packed with pretty girls, but the food here hits way harder. He's decided he's going to be a regular from here on out, and the protagonist shot back that they'd love to have him show up anytime. Yeah, he insisted that the food at Lucas's restaurant is absolutely delicious. And the owner was so damn sweet, Alicia burst out laughing, pure joy lighting up her face at what he said. After the final customer left, the girls snapped the restaurant shut and locked the doors behind them. Alicia thanked the protagonist so earnestly that it practically warmed the air, and then she blurted, I don't even remember the last time we had this many guests. She can't even process it. Just yesterday, this place was packed. He told her he'd happily help, then MC offered to keep cooking with his ingredients if they liked them that much. Alicia lit up and said she'd pay him handsomely for everything. The protagonist shot back in protest, saying, Alicia blurted in shock that he didn't need any money at all. What is he going on about? She didn't care one bit that they were friends, and since she owned the restaurant, she couldn't just take veggies from his garden for free. She blushed at how bold she'd gotten and shot back that, if she was so set on it, he wouldn't mind a bit. Then the girl grinned and said she'd pay double the market price for that taste. The MC said, it's simple, but then he hit her with the truth. She still had a mountain of work to finish, right? She answered that yes, she had. He just chuckled and said that, no matter what. He'd be happy as long as they kept the establishment open for now, so they'd better settle the market price. And once they can actually afford it, they'll rethink that price. Alicia was hit in the chest by his understanding and pure heart, and she thanked him again and again. Then she leaned in and asked what he thought of her older sister. Gio blinked at her question, totally thrown off, and stammered that she was a good girl. Alicia stepped up to him and asked, so why won't you come for a walk with me? The protagonist jolted, choking out a surprise hiccup right then. Annie marched in, and Alicia greeted her with a bright smile. She thanked her for her hard work, but Annie eerily snapped, don't you mess with Gio. Because in her eyes, he was a total idiot who took everything at face value. MC's cheeks burned with outrage. How could she talk about him like that? Then he finally got it. She was just teasing him, and the shock hit him so hard he couldn't even breathe. Alicia nodded. All right, we'll leave it there. Then she marched up to Annie and started to, and whispered in her ear, urging her to keep going just to see if she dares to do nothing. She might even snatch him away from her. Then she burst into laughter, and Annie stared at her in total bewilderment. What did she say? I had no clue what she was going on about. Then Alicia just smiled and shrugged, like, let her do whatever she wants. But the moment she did, Alicia turned serious. She needs to go. She needs to get ready for tomorrow. And then we'll go all in to make Lucas prosper when the protagonist told Annie. He was so relieved Alicia was back on her feet, and the girl just nodded. Yes, indeed. She was so desperate, she snapped total loss of control when Gio finally spoke up. Still, he couldn't believe how fast everything had flipped for the better, and then he studied the guy closely, like he was trying to see the truth underneath. She leaned in, spoke up softly, and said she just had to tell him something about his gift at least. That's what she believed. He had to keep everyone in the dark, so he just stared at her, stunned and puzzled. Then she blurted out, worried, what if some cruel person tries to abuse this incredible power? They could crank out an endless pile of valuable goods like kidnap him, trap him, and make him spend his life growing ingredients. He stared at her in shock, like a slave farmer. Annie cut in that she wasn't trying to scare him. She was just warning him to stay careful. He couldn't stop thinking that maybe that's why she'd cut him off right before he told William about his garden. Then he blurted, stunned, wait, does that mean she actually cares about me? Annie snapped back, basically saying she refuses to let anything bad happen to the restaurant. The main character flashed a grin and said it all made perfect sense to him, like he'd already figured out the plan for the hard times ahead. It matters a ton to have someone to lean on, so he's beyond relieved that he trusts Annie and the others, because now he can finally open up and talk through his problems. She swallowed her nerves and whispered, "Do you even realize what you just did? You literally saved my life this time. No way I could have helped you the way you helped me." MC grinned and told them, "Don't even bring it up." They'd been friends since they were kids, so yeah, everything was totally fine. She snapped back that he was a good-natured idiot, and he fired off, "Wait, what did you just say?" Today, the girl spun around with a sweet, innocent smile and thanked him. Then his courage faltered, like he couldn't finish the thought. She froze in shock and fired off, "Wait, did you eat anything weird?" Her laughter burst out. Honesty hit her like a shock. Wait. She remembered she'd actually eaten meat from a tree and the protagonist. The protagonist bid the girl goodbye and set off toward home. Totally stunned, he never thought Annie would one day thank him that sincerely, and it was. And yeah, it was all because of his gift. He was absolutely glowing, thrilled that so many people. So yeah, everyone else was savoring the payoff of his gift, but Annie was the one who'd seen it coming. Yeah, using his power the wrong way could blow up in his face fast, so he had to stay sharp and careful. The very next day, Lily came back from the market and immediately thought another. Seeing all those people flooding the street, she blurted out, amazed, "Now that's another great deal." He blurted it out in shock, wow, then demanded, "Where the heck is the long line?" Going the last time she showed up, the most. That once crowded spot across the road is empty now, like the whole place vanished. She spotted Lucas's restaurant sign and blurted, "No way, there has to be a..." No one saw it coming, her blood boiled. And that drive fueled her wild success. Meanwhile, the protagonist snapped in panic, "No way, not again." Senna demanded to know what happened, and he snapped back, telling her to go ahead and take a look at it. Pointing at her spoiled tomato plant, the protagonist blurted, "We ate it." The crow's at it again. He's been getting hit with trouble from them non-stop lately. Senna snatched her sword and blurted out, "Should she wipe them out?" He blurted, totally stunned. "Destroy them." "Aren't crows just small fry for bigger adventures?" She shot back, of course. "Yeah, just a little the crows." Dashing into the garden, he spotted the girl clutching a weapon. And scattered in fear, Senna jerked in surprise. "What's going on?" "They weren't soaring up at all." Gio shot back. "That's weird when he's alone. They usually..." He leaned in and said, "They keep popping up, so could it be they instinctively fear your sister?" The girl blinked, stunned. "Wait, does that mean they don't take him seriously?" He laughed it off, then told her good-naturedly, "All right, shut up." Senna burst into laughter and said maybe she should quit adventuring and take a job here as a garden guard, only for the protagonist to snap back that she just wanted to stay home. So, fine, let her go. "Off to new adventures," they said, and with a final goodbye, Senna walked out, and MC sat there thinking, what do I even do now? And thanks to his sister, they managed to slip out for a while, but the fence turned out useless against the birds, and he couldn't stay on guard over every single crop forever. Out of nowhere, it hit him, those magic stones he'd been stacking were coming back to memory. He figured he could power up with them, then a voice snapped back, and he realized the magic stone was already spent, so his level up wasn't coming the way he hoped. He somehow managed to shield his garden from those pesky bird raids right then. A voice cut in, "Your level has..." The numbers climbed to 10, and the vegetable garden suddenly felt like it could grow bigger. New skills were right there to be unlocked, and the protagonist stood there in pure shock, wondering what skills at the end of it all. Right then, Lily blurted his name and rushed over to apologize for interrupting him. Gio's eyes widened. He hadn't expected her to show up, and he fully thought he'd handle everything later. He couldn't pin down who it was, and the merchant shot a greeting at him. She met him with a warm grin, lit up by the chance to finally talk to him, and told him her name right then and there. Lily LaRuca confronted him and said she was a merchant, and the moment the protagonist heard that, surprise hit him so hard he thought, "A merchant?" He snapped. He blurted, "She's so tiny, are you from the Lilliputian race?" Lily nodded and then asked, "And who are you?" The protagonist grinned, told her his name, and asked what he could do for her. The merchant swore the nearby Lucas restaurant had been blowing up lately with killer food, and she laughed until she tried it herself and realized he was right, because the protagonist beamed and said, "You were right." Lily couldn't believe they had such top-tier ingredients, then she breathes out an apology, but she tailed the restaurant right behind it, and that's exactly how she wound up here. "Wait," MC froze in shock. "What? So she's been stalking him this whole time?" The girl didn't stop. "But this place looks way too plain to be where ingredients this incredible are coming from. The protagonist asked her what she even wanted from him, why all of this was happening at all, and he's like, "Wait, what?" Cursed in silence, then Willie snapped his gaze around, studying him closely, but who was she? And she blurted out that the gift has to be the culprit. Gio stared at her, totally thrown off, then Annie's words hit him like a flashback. So he kept his gift on lockdown because he knew it was in his best interest to have everyone else know as little as possible. What if a villain tried to twist this amazing power for evil? He froze, stuck, because he had no idea what to say. He muttered that it wasn't true. Lily burst into laughter and blurted out, "Wait, was he seriously trying to trick her? What a fool it's all." Then surprise hit his face. A simpleton, and his mind just scrambled because everything felt wrong. So what kind of person was she? Anyway, after a while. So he picked a few fruits from his garden and handed them to her, and the moment Lily bit into the apple, her face lit up as she burst out about how insanely delicious it was. "Is this apple from your garden too?" he asked. She grinned and said, "Yup." And then she blurted, "Wow." Lily cut right to the chase and offered him a partnership. He just stared in shock. Then she pushed on right now. He only supplies products to the Lucas restaurant, but with her backing, those goods would reach other shops and cafes too. "Does that sound interesting to you?" she asked. The protagonist blinked, baffled. "Yeah, even if it's true, so what?" The merchant burst out laughing and said she gets it. He's careful in every deal because hobbits don't play dirty. Not on principle, just honest trade. She seriously believed she was a hobbit, yet he'd never heard of hobbits who cheat. They're insanely smart and fiercely devoted to peace. Lily kept pushing that if he was worried, they could lock it in with a magical contract. MC's jaw dropped. A magical contract. "Yeah," she said. "Those spells are built to guard the deal, make sure every step follows the rules, and keep trade secrets safe, like adding a clause that outright bans anyone from spilling magical secrets." The merchant looked him in the eye and asked, "So what, they'll strike a deal and spill all the details right after?" And then the protagonist just froze because she was about to say she. Shifa's food had everyone singing praises at the restaurant, and now he wanted to blow even more people away with it. With them, sure, trading wasn't his style, but a serious talk with a seasoned merchant could actually pay off. Yeah, he still had doubts brewing until she handed him a magical contract. Finally, he clenched his decision and promised her he'd sign the contract. Lily thanked him right away, and thrust the contract into his hands as the protagonist bent in and started signing. A gentle, bright glow flared around him, lighting up his presence like a silent spark. The merchant leaned in and warned him, "From this moment on, the magical contract kicks in right now." The whole room pressed for details, and the protagonist shot back immediately, of course, but the rest of the answer cut off mid. First, he'd lead her to his tiny vegetable garden, and she'd stare like it was magic. Who in their right mind has a vegetable garden? The moment he brought her there, her jaw nearly hit the floor. "Whoa, what is this? Meat grows on a tree, vegetables, fruits, mushrooms, everything," and Gio just shrugged. Like it was nothing, no planting seeds required. In about an hour, everything here shoots up to full-size harvest the second it's ready, and he can grow just about any variety and species he wants. After he'd shown her everything firsthand, he just shrugged and said something along the lines of, "That's pretty much it." She couldn't believe what she was seeing, and the protagonist chimed in that he could infuse everything with a fresh, refreshing flavor. Or toss in a little sweetness, whatever you need, in whatever amount fits the taste. Lily gasped in pure amazement. She still can't believe it. What a gift, MCI. She demanded, "Did you say something?" The girl shot back, "No, nothing special." But the truth was written all over her face. She'd been rattled. Completely. You're not going to find that kind of quality anywhere, and when the protagonist stared at her in shock, he had a whole thought in his head, but what came out of her mouth was totally different. No, seriously, he was about to snap, like right as the next second was getting away from. To suspect something fishy was going on, Lily burst out in admiration. "Everything here is downright first class. Magnus told himself he must have imagined it, but the suspicion wouldn't let go. Gio snapped, "No matter what anyone's yapping, this growing tech is straight up incredible." He just started cooking up fresh product ideas, and Lily leaned in like she couldn't wait. Then he told her what exactly and gave her an example. He launched into fish farming, and she couldn't believe her eyes. She burst out in pure, wide-eyed astonishment. Fish too, weren't the trees supposed to feed everyone? What? Now the protagonist is staring like, no way fish don't grow on trees. They spread like wild mushrooms across the garden beds, and right then, Lily looked like she was about to drop total shock. She leaned in, sniffed it, tasted it, and poked it with her fingers. No matter how she stared at it, there was no denying it. This was the most natural fish she'd ever seen, like it belonged in a fairy tale. She blurted, "Wow, you don't run into something like this every day." The protagonist nodded and admitted, "Yeah, I don't know what to do with it. I have no idea how to cook it." Should he dry it or smoke it? Honestly, he has no clue. The vendor just grinned and tossed out the idea of celebrating their new meeting. Once dinner rolled around, they'd team up and cook the fish together. While she was cooking, Lily finally spilled it to him. She used to. To make deals with fishermen, she leaned in and soaked up everything they knew. That fish she's scrubbing right this second, it's a mackerel. She grabbed the mackerel, split it down the middle, stared in awe at the fresh fillet, and then turned to tell the protagonist. Lily said that he should chop it into 3 pieces, and then she laughed, saying how awesome it was to work with such fresh fish. The protagonist leaned in and asked the vendor if you could even eat the fish raw, but the vendor blinked like, "I've never heard of that." Still, they decided to test it their own way, because why not? He chopped up the next fish while Lily coached him step by step, and right away he realized this was way more complicated than he thought. Then he started cutting. She snipped in, "All right, we still need salt and oil, plus a few veggies wouldn't hurt." The MC stared, blown away by how much she actually knew. She was the one who knew food inside out, and she told him her job made her meet tons of people and chase after amazing cities. Gio blurted, "That sounds amazing," and immediately caught the bug too. Maybe he'd travel with him or even become an adventurer himself. Lily burst into laughter and wondered how growing meat on trees could ever help an adventurer. Then the protagonist cracked up right there with her. And at last, she finally popped the lid off the pot and shouted, "I think it's done." She plated everything with a flourish, and the protagonist stared at it all, blurting out that it was somehow too beautiful to believe. He's already itching to try everything, and Lily drops a plate of food in front of him, then says, "Fried fish a la Meunier." Gio took a taste and practically lit up. "It's so tender," he breathed, stunned by how good it was. It wasn't like he was out here gnawing on dried roach as. He took a bite of every dish and couldn't stop staring in awe. So soft, yet packed with flavors so deep it felt unreal. Could fish really be this juicy? Then he turned to her and asked what she thought. She snapped a curse and blurted, "It's almost too delicious." The protagonist jerked with shock. He never saw that reaction coming from her. The girl kept going, "It's pretty filling, just sweet enough, and that vegetable soup complements its flavor perfectly." And after she tried everything, she rested her cheek on her hand and blurted, "Everything's amazing." She'd never tasted fish this delicious. Seriously, it was mind-blowing everywhere. The protagonist stared at her in shock and blurted, "Wait, everything okay?" She stared at him like she couldn't believe her eyes, then burst into a laugh. Wait, did she just say that out loud? He told her it was true and warned her to keep her voice down next time. Lily told him she was genuinely sorry for getting too familiar, like she'd completely lost herself for a second. She flushed bright with embarrassment, and the shame hit her so hard it was almost unbearable. Gio shot back that nothing was wrong, said the dishes really blew everyone away, and the vendor nodded right along. It really was pure masterpiece. The protagonist told her it was all because of her, and the girl shot back, "No, that's wrong. It was all him." They bickered for a few more minutes until Lily suddenly burst into laughter. Then she suggested. They agreed to a mutual concession, and that's the whole secret behind their fruitful cooperation, she said. He added that from this point on, he could call her by her first name, and the protagonist shot back, "Okay, now." Now he wanted to scoop up even more of these fish, but what if the waters held even more? Then he'd basically have to shrink everything else, because if only he had it's a bigger garden, but out here, there's barely any space to really stretch out. Lily calmly realized you can't ever push past the boundaries of the... Then it hit him, an idea sparked fast. Since he harvests quickly, he'll rotate different crops. Then right on cue, the crows swooped back in. The protagonist snapped. There they go again. Look, they're staring down the fish like they're about to pounce. Then he snatched a shovel like he was about to strike back. He snatched his shovel and bolted at the birds, screaming that no one could touch him. For him, he slammed his arm forward and nailed them, but the crows snapped back fast. He snapped the shovel up and swung it wildly, shouting as everything around them scattered fast. Lily kept yelling at them to get out the pests, barely holding back her laughter. And yeah, it felt like a seriously awful start until she started to turn. When he spun around, there they were. Those crows had already swooped in and stolen his fish, and he couldn't help but feel sick about it. They snatched theirs in the end. Then the vendor blinked in shock and asked if he was all right, and the protagonist answered. Still, he managed to salvage something, at least enough to keep going. Those birds swarm in flocks, and you can't scrape together enough food from anywhere else. Lily said, "Sure, he can stop them, but he'll never let those guys fill their bellies without a fight, and maybe he shouldn't be raising fish either." Fish, he told her with a heavy heart, because how could that even be? Then it hit him that morning. He just unlocked a brand new skill. Here it is, he's forging a protector, and that voice is the key to meeting it. He blurted out, "So should I build you a protector?" Gio blurted out, "Yes." Lily frowned in confusion. Who on earth was he talking to? At that exact moment, a golem started to materialize right out of the ground, popping up like it had been waiting there the whole time, leaving the girl stunned and shocking everyone else too. Also, in the blink of an eye, the protagonist. An absolutely massive golem crashed into view right in front of them. Right in front of them, the fishtail jutted out from behind its head, and MC stared at him in total confusion. So is this the moment he finally stands guard over his garden? The golem slammed its chest in total agreement, and a heavy, dull ring echoed through the air. The protagonist blurted, "Excellent." Then he snapped, released the move, and scattered those crows to the wind, pointing straight at the target's direction. Lily was frozen in shock and blurted, "What's happening?" And Gio answered, "Because that's also part of his gift." The girl stared at him, stunned, speechless. They leaned in, ready to see what the Golan would do next. The protector tore toward the crows, whipping his fingers in a deadly swing. His fist sent them flying, but the birds didn't stop. They swooped in and started to pounce on him too. Lily blurted, "The crows are attacking the golem back." The protagonist blurts out, stunned at just how untouchable he is because not a single scratch mars him. Even the birds stared in pure confusion while the protector snapped back into motion and started throwing punches again. Then he finally zoomed away and sent those annoying birds scrambling when they backed off. The protagonist burst out, "Hooray, like, that's what you get." He really handed them the beating Lil. Lily couldn't believe the golem's blows were that brutal. What if he turned that power against the world and unleashed pure evil? The protagonist patted the golem's body and with a smile lit up his face. "Well done," it seemed to say, and then he breathed out, because all his hard work had paid off and everything finally turned out just right. The MC snapped around to the shocked girl and bellowed right in her face, "Don't panic now, the harvest is safe and no one's getting hurt." She nodded and shot back, "Okay," and then she said it, just like that. She bid the protagonist a heart-wrenching farewell and then vanished into the night. The protagonist wondered if Lily was back in her room, prepping everything for the deal, and when she told him, "We'll meet again," it landed like a promise with teeth. Again, because the golem shields the garden, the days slipped by in calm, peaceful quiet. A couple of days later, the merchant returned, beaming, and thanked him straight to his face, and the protagonist shot back, Yeah, but tell me, is everything ready?" The girl confirmed it. She bought the plot right next to him, right beside that empty house, and Gio shot up in shock. Why would she do that? Lily burst into laughter and told him she was handing him the whole plot right to his hands. Then his brain stalled, because he swore he'd misheard her. What did she even mean? She hands him the whole plot like it's nothing, then drops that vacant land in his lap without a second thought. Yeah, this is big, serious business. The merchant leaned in and told him she wanted him to harvest everything he could grow the planted area. And there'd be more to reap. He stared at her, confused. What about all the money she'd already poured in? It was definitely not a small sum. She told him, "Don't stress, this one's on me." And the moment she handed it over, his jaw dropped so hard it felt unreal. Was this actually normal? "Normal," Lily said with a pompous snap. "This is an investment for business development." And she was sure buying that plot would soon lead to. The girl burst into laughter over the huge profits and said she thinks this will only make their bond even stronger, while he leaned back and thought, "Yeah, that trust is about to grow." With a jolt of disbelief, the protagonist's face lit up. He smiled at her, thanked her for the insanely luxurious gift, then gripped her hand, thanked her again, and urged her to keep working together. And forged the business? The merchant nodded and kept shaking her hand, and he couldn't shake the feeling this person was absolutely trustworthy. Lily kept moving with purpose, all right? No more stalling. First things first. They've got to tear that abandoned house down. MC told her it wouldn't be a problem, but she just stared like she had no clue what he meant. Then that voice dropped the bomb. A whole new plot had been unlocked. Should he turn the land into fields for the protagonist? He blurted, "Yes." And the voice shot back, "Do you want to put up a new fence?" He said yes again, and Lily just stood there, utterly lost. The house vanished in an instant, like it got erased from reality. Then everything was finally set, and MC burst out laughing in pure delight. What a crazy plot. Just how much can we actually grow here? Lily stared hard at the fence-side spot where the house used to stand on that cleared, plowed land, mumbled, "Yes," and then whispered, "Now that's what I call a magical gift." The protagonist leaned on the golem, grinning at his partner, and when she shoved the money into his hands and called it today's pay, shock hit him so hard he decided he'd better stash it away before Senna finds out. Senna burst into the garden, gasped at how massive it had grown, and shouted, "When did you manage to pull this off?" Gio said someone handed him this land and now they'd raise even more crops, so she blurted, "Yes, so many things we can grow. So many meat trees, every kind of meat imaginable," and then it just hit me. "What?" "Wait, what?" He goes, "It's fish," and then hits you with this line like it's the tastiest thing ever. Senna grinned and leaped onto the golem, shouting that they'd gain more of them. Then the protagonist nodded along, even though these new golems definitely didn't plan to listen. Senna beamed at the sheer abundance and sighed that the world really needed gardens like this. Everywhere then the protagonist shrugged, saying, yeah, it'd be perfect for his plan, but space just wouldn't allow it. He cracked open the system window and demanded to know what they'd harvest next. She realized she could finally grow medicinal herbs, she asked, boldly, and when even AIM nodded along, the MC was totally stunned. He leaned in and asked what kind of herb it was, and Senna shot back that those healing potions were the whole reason they did it. Yeah, usually you could grab it at the pharmacy, but lately the shelves have been running dry, because potion makers are forced to sit tight until the next harvest of this herb rolls around. Shefa's hit with the fallout too, and now she can't finish the dungeon at all. She flashed a smile and told him to rest, and Gio's mind spun. Then he froze mid-thought as she kept going, Explo. Dungeons without potions are brutal, but if Shefa can pull off harvesting aim after, she'll be over the moon. After a while, he was lugging a bag and realized he'd harvested AIM. What kind of pharmacy did Senna bring up? He crept toward the abandoned house, dread clawing at his chest as it sat there, empty and ruined. Abandoned, but wait, there's a chart here, so tell me, what kind of owner would leave something like this behind? He owned it, so why would he even step into a pharmacy like that? He stepped inside, tiptoed ahead, and felt the dread hanging in the air. Crackling bottles of potions lined the shelves, and a spooky, empty place stretched out ahead, and nobody was around. Then the protagonist spotted a shadowy silhouette. He was soaked through, and he desperately wanted to tell him he came to hand it over, but then he strode up to Dennis and asked, Is this your pharmacy? Dennis flushed and admitted he was just a salesperson and a pharmacist's assistant. The protagonist couldn't believe it. Why on earth was he dressed like a maid? Dennis blurted out, awkward as hell. Isn't that weird? And then he started to say, his uniform didn't match the vibe at all. Marin burst out of the shadows and said, like it was some kind of secret, it's a special uniform. Dennis blurted her name in shock, and she marched up to the MC and greeted him, shocked because she'd never seen him here before. Gio froze in confusion, convinced he'd just spotted a walking dead man. That busted-up house fit her like a glove. Dean's already frozen in pure terror. He snapped after her and even offered to swap her uniform, but Marin shut it down fast. She said it was the manager's orders. The protagonist grimaced, thinking, why'd they plop the shop in a place that looks so hideous, then noticed the adorable uniform meant to charm visitors instead of scaring them off. He spun to Danish and told him, don't hold back, and that confidence fit him perfectly. Dane snapped back, seething with disgust. He couldn't stand the. He wore it because he was a boy, plain and simple. Rin blurted, I'm not a boy, I'm a total cutie. Denise looked utterly confused and blurted, wait, what? What the hell is this? He's just a plain ordinary kid. Marin leans in and asks, wait, what are you even talking about? Then his eyes. His eyes go wide, his cheeks look unbelievably soft, and that apron fits him perfectly. So is she really lying? Because he was born pure and sweet as can be. Sweet, the protagonist stared at them, baffled and was. And just as he was about to walk out, Danny suddenly slammed the brakes and froze. Stopped him mid-step and demanded, you came here on business, didn't you? Didn't he? He nodded right on the spot and started gathering ingredients to get a health potion and wanted to ask, will you buy it? Denise and Marin stared at it in stunned disbelief. He grabbed the prize and demanded the truth. Then the protagonist asked for a real target. Dennis leaned in and said, yeah, answering this, it'll actually help. Agreed, this is top-tier stuff. Marin gently touched the sprout. She scooped the sprouts with her fingers and practically gasped, I can't even believe this. This product is so fresh and bursting with energy, it's made to craft a top-tier health potion right from the start. MC blinked in shock, and in first class, Dennis snapped. Potions aren't all the same, some are trash, some are gold. Their worth swings wildly with how effective they are, and the higher the class, the more valuable the potion. With her gift, Marin can spot whether a potion is top tier in a single glance. Denise stared at the target in the awe, then blurted out, he had never laid eyes on AIM leaves this massive, so where the heck did he even collect them? Gio stumbled through, admitting it was a secret, and Denise beamed, saying this year's goal was doomed thanks to the weather, then insisted, like it was destiny, that he'd still found the perfect one. The protagonist flashed a grin and shrugged, saying, nothing special. Marin's stare turned downright terrifying, and that's when the question hit, why did Dennis like him this much? Why was he suddenly praising him? What was going on? The protagonist called out to her, and she snapped, asking what was wrong, like she already knew. He shot back that he had a favor to ask his sister. Senna was an adventurer Dennis lit up and insisted she visited him all the time in Shifa, so that made them family too. The protagonist promised he'd sell them the AIM for cheap, then said that once the potion was ready, he'd make the deal complete. Could he actually sell it to him directly? Marin nodded, like she was all in. Shefa Squad was their usual crowd anyway, but she also had a condition. Maybe she wanted even more than a perfect shot, and that's what he couldn't stop thinking about. She snapped, glaring as she declared sweet Dennis was her man, his heart belonged to her and only her. His love, after MC stormed out of the pharmacy, he told himself, this doesn't feel right without Marin, but then the health. The potion's coming back on sale, and right after that, Shefa will thank him. Then he flashed a sly grin. Trapped in his own head meanwhile, over at the pharmacy, Dennis admitted he should have told him to haul in even more of the same raw material. And yeah, Marin swore it was super high quality, a real top tier AIM, but she'd never swap it for AIM. Dennis asked in a haze of confusion. Of course it's her again. Why does fate keep pulling her back into the picture? This is exactly why it hits with that truly exceptional level of quality. Where did he even get that Marin tipped the potion into a... She froze with the flask in hand because in that instant, she spotted something. Dennis grinned and leaned in, asking, "So is it first class, Myrnie?" Moran blurted out, "Whoa, this potion is straight up unreal. You can't just sell something like that. You gotta dilute it first, or it's not gonna work." Meanwhile, Senna dashed over and yelled at Gio that she'd grabbed a mountain of health potions. Then she shot back. "Tell me, did you bring those medicinal herbs to the pharmacy?" Shifa practically burst with joy and demanded that he thank him for her. Then the protagonist grinned and asked, "Wait, is that for real? Or are we talking a date as your way of paying me back?" Maybe, but right now Senna was gone, launched on another long raid like she always does. The protagonist pushed the point. So she's at it again, worried she'd stir up trouble for Shefa once more, and Senna snapped back. "That's slander," before stressing. She's a real warrior and she's completely indispensable in... Down in the dungeons, the MC muttered that she still felt young then. Not long after, the dungeon came calling again. Annie shouted a warning. There was a monster up ahead, and then she charged straight at it, crashing forward to strike. Shefa nodded, then pushed on for just a little longer like she couldn't let the moment end yet, which her hand, brimming with magic, would cover. Senna whipped her sword through the air and struck, and he sliced the monster clean in half, no doubt about it. Annie threw praise her way for wiping out the blood. Blood Grizzly so easily, she grinned and said it. It was all thanks to her back. Annie shot back, saying it was all on her, her skills, and nothing else. Shefa nodded in agreement this time. She barely stepped in at all. It was all. Her gift, the favor of the sword god, and she caught on fast. They surged into the dungeon so quickly, Shefa no. Nifa finally clocked it. Gio had done the heavy lifting, because dropping into that dungeon without a health potion was pure suicide, and he saved them for real. Now they're like, "Send us." Anna grinned and told him he looked totally flustered after she thanked him. Then Annie leaned in, like, "Wait, so this is the protagonist's potion." Suddenly, she slammed into their path and cut off every route forward, and said, "Look, someone's up ahead." She tried to tell her next, but she could only say, "Since two people," but barely like a whisper of voices, so faint it sounded like just like a wounded animal. They bolted into the dungeon and then spotted two lifeless bodies. She snapped, "We've got to help them right now." "What's their deal?" Senna was right on the edge of. To yank the potion from her pocket when a monster burst into the scene out of nowhere. Right behind her, he popped up and Annie slipped her a quick hint. A sharp hint hit her and then she leaped. He yanked himself aside. Wait, are these really his friends? The friends of the one they crushed earlier. He swallowed his pride, apologized, and begged Senna. Senna blazed forward to pull their focus for just one heartbeat. Shifa snapped that these wounds weren't just a bad accident, they were proof of someone's brutal handiwork too. Work of monsters, Sina insisted everything was fine, and they could. They trusted her with everything, and now they had to stand between her and danger, guarding the injured with their lives. Bleeding, she stared at the three of them and realized one thing: defeating. Speeding one was a breeze until fighting. 3. While the girls were the only ones in sight, covering them completely. Annie blurted, "This is the only way, look!" It looks like more are closing in, and yeah, they're coming. Get ready, more monsters are about to crash in here real soon. Senna blinked, completely baffled. Wait, even more. More right then, boom warriors burst out and step into the fight. Burst out of the dungeon and launched a full-on attack. Charging straight into the monsters, Shifa believed they'd finally arrived as reinforcement and unleashing the Empress Prestige skill. The skill made Senna's body feel weightless, turning her into a blur of unstoppable motion in every fight. She yanked her sword free and promised she'd cut them down. Anna snapped the monster's strike aside and ricocheted off the wall like a thrown blade. She rammed her sword straight into the enemy's head, crashed onto the ground, and snapped. Now we need to eat. To rush over and help, Senna spun around and there was Elizabeth right behind her, looking completely baffled. When she realized it was Shefa's squad, Annie and Shefa locked eyes with her and stepped in to support her. She gasped in shock because she'd just saved them. Then Elizabeth snapped, asking who, if anyone, was hurt. Annie nodded instantly because they were out of time and they rushed to get that potion, trying to rub it straight onto their wounds right away. Elizabeth pointed at their battered wounds and said they were so bad they'd need a whole barrel of it. She snapped her fingers and told her warriors to haul every last potion they had. Then the boy scoffed. "If it's truly first class, you won't need that many." Annie poured the potion over the girl's body and right on cue, a burst of magical radiation exploded out of nowhere. Radiation burst overhead, and with every flash, it started knitting her wounds closed. Everyone stared in total shock, tracking just how fast the wounds started to close, and the girls blinked back into reality and stared at their bodies in pure shock, like their own power just blew their minds. And then the next thing happened where the Those brutal wounds finally shut up and vanished, then they wasted no time, sprinting to thank Shifa's squad. Elizabeth snapped, asking if they were lost or if their squad had already ditched them. If that was the case, they'd tag along, they'd spot them on the way. Shefa promised they'd get a quick look around, and Elizabeth shot back at the post. The healing potion they drank wasn't just top tier, it felt straight up super level. Superb, but where did they even get it? She stammered, eyes darting. Shefa answered awkwardly to the apatha. Elizabeth said the Hothic Harry was run by Mrs. Marin, and that means she's a seriously skilled pharmacist. She's gonna remember it once she finally walks away. Senna leaned in and told him with total confidence how unbelievably beautiful she was. Shefa said her and Elizabeth once made a pact, and she claimed she knew exactly what was coming. Annie just snapped. That's what a B-class warrior does. You can count on her, she clocks everything, but somehow she keeps reshuffling her squad's lineup, even while her teammates are solid pros all the time. That's strange, Annie said, thinking hard. Senna snapped. Alright, whatever, sure, but their potion is way more messed up than that. What in the... It healed even the deadliest wounds, like it was beyond first-class pure, top-tier magic quality, except she'd never even heard of anything like it before. Annie stared at the potion, then shot a question how on earth did they brew something that good. Ocean, Senex snapped because he's the protagonist, and yeah, this whole disaster traces back to him. Meanwhile, MC sprinted up to the pharmacy and then slipped into Denny's place and watched him send the last customers out. Everyone broke into pure joy the moment the new potion hit, and it was all because of him. Gio grinned and nodded. He'd already heard the whole thing from Senna. He pondered how it could heal wounds that life itself couldn't survive, and he was over the moon that he'd helped, thrilled he could finally be useful to Shefa. The protagonist clocked it. He'd just rolled in a fresh batch of AIM, and Dennis snapped, shocked. Already. Reddy Marin darted to the corner, peeked around it, and quietly greeted the protagonist. Dennis called out to him just as he wondered if she was spying on him again. He leaned in and told her that the MC had pulled in even more aim. Marin snatched the cue, grinned at him, and thanked him with pure joy. It was all because of his herbs that they suddenly pulled in a mountain of customers. Even after they watered the potion down again and again, that wild rush still hit like lightning. Gio awkwardly admitted that sure, he can grow aim, but brewing potions was totally beyond his reach. Beyond him, Dina leaned in and told Marin, I swear. She was insanely skilled, and when she started, pure joy lit up her whole face. I just hope I can get the protagonist's hands in mine, and said, it's all mine, every last bit, all F. All thanks to him, the protagonist was left utterly perplexed. He swore he'd come back with a fresh stash of medicinal herbs. Meanwhile, Senna grabbed a magic stone, tossed it onto the ground, and burst out in pure joy with a loud exclamation. Magic stones are everywhere here, like the whole place is dripping with them. MC realized the health potion had kicked in, and now they were tearing through their progress at insane speed. After seeing medicinal herbs pay off, he couldn't resist, so he pushed forward to see what new doors the next level would unlock, and right then, the system flashed, his level went up. A brand new fence type got unlocked, fresh skills hit the spotlight, and even wild new products showed up. Gio blurted, Mol Salsal. Wait so much, and you're saying it's a brand new skill, can you actually grow? Eggs, the protagonist blurted out, and you could tell his curiosity was through the roof. Suddenly, an egg burst into view. It finally burst from the sprout and grew into something real at last. The protagonist stared at it, blurted out, Whoa, an egg, and they said, I told you it was tiny, but trust me, it was absolutely massive. Massive. So what was about to break free from this egg? A monster. Monster, he's already kicked it off with the golem, so now the real question hits, how do you even raise something like that? And what are you supposed to do with it once it's yours? He's praying he'll somehow crack it. He reaches for an egg from a... Branch is easy, but what about the rest? Right then, tiny creatures flash in, and the real question hits hard. Lily marched up to him, and MC tossed the egg into the bushes, then Lily leaned in and told him she'd heard about the new super potions. So was he really behind all of this? Turns out his medicinal herbs hit different too. Nice, right? Man, those plants are packed with uses. Plants just that alone already feels like it means something, and look at this whole field of them too. He's doing a great job even without her. And the protagonist agrees he'll push himself to grow that kind of thing too, one step at a time. But what about monsters and magical creatures? Lily said she's got that covered too because people are demanding it. Some are for raw materials, some are for other uses, and the protagonist asked, but these are already adult monsters, so what about the eggs? Lily blinked in shock. She'd never seen those things up for sale before. Real, living monsters don't show up often, and when they do, they're pure evil. Violence that doesn't belong anywhere near humans, so tell me, who would ever dare to raise a monster and actually live with it? She worried no one would ever buy that egg once she left MC behind. MC stared at that egg, his mind racing, wondering if it was about to hatch into something wild or just break his heart. incompatible with humans, while it kept going anyway. It might be small, but if it comes down to it, he'll handle it. What if we stop it from hatching right now? Suddenly, the egg started rattling and cracking with noise, and he stared at it in pure shock. Prize if he'd moved, that's when everything would have changed. Night crashed in, and Gio sat on the porch, watching the darkness swallow the world. On the porch of the house, Senna was still running late, and the sun was already slipping out of the sky. But even so, warmth spread through him. Somehow, then Senna ate, thanked him. She thanked him back, and he leaned in, asking if her appetite was still going strong, just like always. Did she have to work today? Senna nodded, then smiled grimly, because she'd be fighting the monster again. The protagonist snapped her gaze away, her mind racing as a monster looked just as lost, so she blurted, "What are you doing?" MC fired back that he was prepping for the harvest tomorrow, then asked straight up if monsters were really that brutal. Senna blurted, "Oh, so he does," and then she snapped, "Wait, does he remember the girls they saved? Because without his potion, that monster would have carved their bellies open with its claws, and Gio felt that dread crawl over him. So yeah, they're actually incompatible, and she knows it's gonna blow up hard." She bolted up to the golem, wrapped her arms around it, and blurted out if there were any gentle monsters just like him. That golem? The kind you could actually befriend like? Seriously, he's gotta be lonely as hell. She's gone all the time, and a monster like that would feel like family. Family. The protagonist flashed a grin and said, "Sure, but he won't admit it's hard without her, especially when she's home." He's still just lazy, huh? He's not lonely, his parents died super early, so she's basically his sister, and now, constantly on the move, he snatched the egg and demanded, "So how in the world did you end up here?" Suddenly, that egg started squirming again, and he made up his mind he'd raise it himself and he'd give it nothing but the best care. The protagonist snapped open the system window and declared he needed to start growing food for it right away. So what kind of monster would he even call it after the MC finally finishes working? He snapped that he was done for the day, then said he'd go check the egg. The monster was showing up more and more, again and again. It felt like it was about to burst open any second, so he snatched it up with his own hands. He jolted upright and suddenly felt ice cold creep through him, even though it had been warm just a second ago. What's the deal? Where's my monster at? He needs to fire it up fast. A few minutes later, he yanked the egg up and wrapped it tight in. He handed me the egg in a blanket and swore it felt a bit warmer. But even with that, he couldn't settle. Senna was still restless. Anna was having a sleepover today, and he thought he tucked the egg right beside him and finally let sleep take over. Hopped into bed and started pudding. Placing the egg beside him made it drop right as. Clutching the hope in its shell, it drifted off, itching for that moment to finally hatch. A few hours later, that crackling sound started blasting out of nowhere. Bursting out of the egg, he stared at it in stunned disbelief. Is that egg about to hatch? He's got one shot. What does he do right now? So tell me, could this be the spark that kicks off the protagonist's journey? Started cheering him on, and then out of nowhere, a cat showed up. Hatched from the egg, he burst into happy thoughts. Is this the monster? It looks like a kitten week. And then he couldn't stop asking himself, so what am I supposed to do? The protagonist marched up to the fruit bearer. He shoved the tree into place and blurted, You've got to pour in some milk, and yeah, there were braids too. Milk grades splashed across the tree weight. He muttered that a drink couldn't hurt, grabbed a coconut, and started hacking it open right as the sweet contents spilled out. Gio leaned in with a grin and blurted, Whoa, this smells amazing. He slid a bowl of milk right in front of the cat. He looked at the cat and asked if it would drink it. He licked it once, and the taste flipped something in him, then he guzzled it like it was gold, grinning as the protagonist blurted, It worked, and downed even more like he couldn't stop. But somehow, just like always, the garden hooks him up with everything he needs. He needs it, so there'll be plenty to feed him. He already looks way more cheerful, and he'll grow big. He even asked them not to rush to chug it all at once, or he'll end up with a nasty stomach ache, so the protagonist shot his hand out toward Milky, who then suddenly dove in and started cuddling with it. He burst out laughing, saying, What a cute, fluffy kitten. He's terrified everyone will see him as a monster, but then he thinks, what if he treats her like a cat and just keeps her as a pet? Still, he can't stop asking himself what on earth should he name her. He watched her, and then his focus snapped to her like he was about to move as soon as the moment hit. Once his senses kick in, they'll label her Milky. 'Cause he's obsessed with milk then. A few hours later, Senna stormed back home and blurted her question in pure shock. What the hell is this even supposed to be? Gio told them, Guess what, I'm staying with you all now. Senna blurted, Wait, is it a kitten? Did he pick it up? Gio nodded along and couldn't stop himself from thinking, so is he really just going to keep quiet about the fact that he hatched it from a monster egg? She leaned in to pet him, then Milky latched on and bit her hard, and Senna snapped, Does he bit back, and Gio shot the question right away. Is that even possible? Then blurts out, Why did you reach for her so fast? She lunged to catch him and instantly scared the kitten off, Senna snapped, annoyed and panicked. But he's got one thing on his mind, protecting that cat, not her. The beast snatched her brother, and Senna snapped into action, pummeling back and screaming that Gio wasn't the one she had lost, because he was her brother and she was his sister, not theirs to take. Gio ripped through Senna's dinner like a showman, then handed her milky milk, leaving Senna utterly baffled as she stared and demanded answers. Did he really grow milk in his garden because she wanted that same miracle too? After they finished dinner, she gulped down a glass of milk. And then he couldn't help it, he burst out joyfully, yelling that it was downright delicious, so sweet. The protagonist licked his lips, grinning as he savored the thought of picking something wonderful. Snag those garden delicacies, every bite is pure heaven, and now they're gone. Now they finally felt like a real family, growing right before their eyes, giving them even more reason to keep growing and selling, bigger than ever. More than the very next day, the protagonist stormed into the pharmacy and ran into Marin and Dennis, and he snapped that today wasn't just about aiming anymore, it was about something brand new. They gaped in shock at the wild pile of herbs, and he leaned in and asked if they had anything they could spare. Mariner nodded and agreed. Yeah, every single one of them was rare, and that made it hit hard. Was that the Hayari herb they'd found? No way. She'd never laid eyes on that herb before, but everyone swore it could become an ice potion, so the MC finally asked, "Can I make an ice potion from it?" Marin nodded and agreed if she drank it. No fire or heat could touch her. Dennis chimed in that potions could swing wildly, depending on what they were made of. Gio said an ice potion would be a lifesaver for any adventurer, and Marin nodded hard especially where the underground world gets so brutal and out of reach. Like a volcano crater tearing the air open meanwhile. Senna and the crew pushed deeper into the dungeon, and as the darkness closed in, she let out a heavy sigh. He complained that the heat here was unbearable, and Annie shot back that she felt like she'd evaporate any second. Shifa just grinned and said it was because a volcano was up ahead. Senna blurted in shock, "Volcano?" and Enya nodded, confirming this dungeon was packed with levels that ramped up in difficulty. Shefa told them they'd already crushed the cave level, and next came a volcanic level after that, a forest level, then ruins, and just when they thought it couldn't get worse, there were 5 underwater levels total, and each one came with its own rules and monsters. This one was the absolute hardest, and nobody had ever beaten it yet. That's why it sat at the top of the hardest levels. This volcano blasted out brutal heat, and only a tiny few could ever brag that they had actually survived and conquered it. Senna asked how they were supposed to finish the level, and Annie snapped back that they had to wipe out every last boss lurking inside it. If they pulled off the win, they'd earned it. Crushing the bosses rained down massive rewards, and they'd walk away with plenty of valuable loot they could sell for serious cash. Senna blurted in shock, "Wait, they're really about to square up with the volcano bosses, but would that even work?" And he said that brutal heat had them trapped, holding them back until now, because they didn't have a drop of water magic. Senna glanced around like, "Alright, maybe that's enough for today," and then he shouted, "Hey!" Shefa yanked a potion from her backpack and said it was a color she'd never seen before, so bright it looked like pure eye. The air turned cold because it wasn't just any drink, it was an ice potion, a trial batch Marin cooked up herself. "Drink it, and you won't fear a lick of heat or a shred of fire," Senna blurted out, stunned, so they're really charging straight into the volcano. Shifa just nodded in agreement. She handed her the potion for free on one brutal condition: they had to test it first. Annie leaned in and demanded to know how she brewed something that good. The chiefess snapped back that she'd been handed the rare herb, Hayari, and brewed it with her own hands. Then Senna shot Gio a petulant look and asked, "Yeah, but why?" "Why?" Shefa snapped, because now everyone had to drink the... They downed the potion and the cold hit like a wave, freezing them from the inside out. Senna suddenly sneezed and shouted like the heat was frying them alive, and Shefa snapped that they had to rush into the volcano. Now. A few minutes later, they burst onto the volcanic level and Shifa immediately spotted a volcano rising where it shouldn't. Pino planted his feet, and the ground started burning like an oven. Annie blurted, "Look, there's lava down there." Senna grinned, and for some reason, the air felt like a sweet, icy relief. The weather hit that perfect sweet spot. Everything clicked, and the protagonist and Marin were doing great. Annie marched up to the lava and muttered that nothing was going on. She wasn't about to risk swimming in it. Then Senna moved to touch it when Shifa barked, "Don't!" Flaming monsters erupted right beside them. After that, they snapped into a fighting stance, and it looked like everything was about to explode. They'd hit harder than every enemy they'd ever faced. Senna whirled her sword and sent the monk crashing down in one clean strike. Monsters really just that. Shifa's eyes widened. His sword strike had just weakened his grip. His flames flickered, and somehow a cold chill slammed into him like he'd been struck. Wasn't it all because of that potion? The effects stuck around for ages, and he even said it felt weirdly easy for. So Marin and the MC team up to brew this potion. Now everyone else is going to line up to buy it, because the demand is about to explode. Senna nodded. Should they press on, Shifa nodded too, and with the potion in hand, they wouldn't get left behind. They'd take down the boss. Meanwhile, the protagonist blurted with pure excitement, promising that today they'll reap an absolutely incredible harvest of Hyari grass. He'd burn the whole world down if it meant getting Shifa back. He popped open the system window and claimed there was still one last thing he hadn't dared to try yet. Was this some upgraded fence, the kind that could actually save you? The system asked him straight up if he wanted to build a wall. Every single protagonist nodded in sync, and they all agreed. Then, without warning, towering walls shot up from the ground like they were alive. Stone rose up around the plot, boxing everything in. He stared, utterly baffled. Was that a fortress wall or something else? But why in the world would it wrap an ordinary garden? MC scrapped the whole wall build and snapped, "I don't need that." He stared at the next skill, and the system barked the request again. Geo nodded and agreed to hide the area, but only after. But after he scanned every corner, not a single thing moved, nothing happened. Usually the effects hit right away. Then he'd dive into the new varieties, but it looked like they hadn't really added anything fresh at all. But then, right out of nowhere, super-powered products started flooding in. Super strong quality. Then the protagonist snapped, shocked beyond words. They used to be plain and mediocre, but now they're top tier so good it's almost ridiculous. Like if average tastes amazing, then this is on another level. After what felt like forever, Senna slumped and groaned that the dungeon had drained her dry, wishing just for a heartbeat she could crash into a soft, cozy bed, and then it happened. Suddenly, she stared at the plot like it was a crime scene and snapped, "What's going on?" The protagonist grinned at her and said. Then he asked. She snapped, "What's wrong?" and then blurted, "Where did they come from?" From the MC's puzzled look, he asked where Geo led her, and she blurted in shock, "How is that even possible?" Then he answered, He was just testing out fresh skills, and the neighbors probably were about. He was shocked too, so he swore he'd never use that skill again. He yanked up the system window and smashed the plot to cancel it. A lot hiding skill saved in a rush, and then she let out a breath like it was finally over, because she was. She was so wiped out that she figured, if I don't find a bed soon, I'm sleeping outside. The protagonist suddenly realized she could barely move. Senna snapped, "It's all his fault." Did he just hand Marin more herbs again, and now they're trapped in a full day of non-stop climbing around her like it's her favorite playground? Right there at the volcano, the protagonist snapped in shock because while he was actually sprinting through the levels, the guy in the background was just sitting there, farming herbs like nothing was happening. And he couldn't even get a proper goodbye in before they'd already smashed through the first level of the dungeon. So come on, let's celebrate with dinner. Senna practically burst with excitement, but MC stepped in, told her to cool it, and invited the girls too. He'd handle dinner and whip up everything, and Senna explained it with a bright, happy grin. It was seriously the kind of motivation that fired everyone up. Day after day, Marin kept cranking out brand new. Potions were handed to the squad, and she was the one who finished the job. Beat through multiple dungeon levels and pushed deeper every time. They stepped into the dungeon, and Annie blurted, "They're here, this is the boss, the red lizard, also known as Volcano." Kano Senna snapped to attention, stunned beyond words. Just look at how massive he was and how brutally hard to beat he felt. Even with those hard scales, it looked like nobody had managed to beat him in years. That guy was hands down the toughest enemy they'd ever faced. So tell me, what are they supposed to do now? They vowed they'd fight, no doubt about it. Senna stood in the middle, striking from every direction at once. They teamed up for the push, chugged another round of potion because one never knows when you'll need a little extra backup. Senna swallowed the potion, and with a grim shake of her head, she swore there was nothing left anyone could do. They handle the lizard, then feast on a dinner so delicious it feels unreal. Shefa snatched up their swords and barked the order. The order to kick off the battle hit at once, then her Empress power surged, and Allah's strength roared even stronger. Allies rallied stronger, while the enemy's power started to crumble. Senna blurts out in shock. What a roar, that guy was absolutely sizzling. Shifa thought he'd been distracted. By Senna, he looked like he was loading up all his power, eyes locked on her, like he couldn't miss a single move. Seriously, closing the distance wasn't going to be easy at all. She ducked behind a rock and stayed there, daring him to hunt her down. He just couldn't outsmart her hunting instincts. Fire Chief of the Magical Blast. Then Annie launched herself at the moment, and Annie jumped, swinging her knife like a threat made of steel, leaving a brutal wound carved into his body. She swore she'd succeeded, and that she'd finally landed the hit that hurt him. This potion hits like a truck one sip, and you're instantly in over your head. Senna grinned and said, "You totally caught him off guard." Shifa lit up and said, "Great job when we team up like this. It proves just how strong we really are." She praised Annie, then cut herself off like she couldn't finish the sentence. "Not without her help if she didn't step in, Annie." And Senna dug deep, gathering every last ounce of strength. Then they charged back at the monster, ready to slam it with one unstoppable strike together again. Meanwhile, back inside the Adventurers Guild, where every rumor feels like a starting gun, Canaria flashed a grin at Shifa and blurted, "So how? So where was all this headed? Did she recruit some brand new warrior to her side?" The chief nodded because it was Senna. Her old friend Canaria just stared, trying to make sense of it. She always gives it her all, but lately, those dungeons keep getting brutal, and it's only getting worse by the day. She didn't look that strong at all, like she was still brand new, still figuring everything out. Senna leaned back with a happy grin and asked what they'd be eating for dinner. Canary leaned in and asked, "So what's your plan for today? Are you here to show off your wins?" Shifa nodded, and they came to report. She slid the scale onto the table, like she was about to drop a bomb. The table was gone in an instant, and Annie swore it was a volcano scale, like an actual eruption waiting to happen. That was the report. They tore through the boss on the volcano and won. Canaria stared at the other adventurers like she was sizing up her next move. He pushed forward with fear in his chest and still asked, "So yeah, Annie and Senna, it's actually real." She cranked her hands over her ears at the sheer blast of sound, and Shefa nodded along. "Those scales were the smoking gun," Canaria said, and then she pointed it out, right on the spot. Those were definitely the scales of a red lizard. No ordinary lizard. These things were ridiculously huge. Did they link up with another squad? Senna grinned and said, "Yeah, we handled it all together." They stared at their own hands, then realized the boss's body was still right there, and they had to haul it out fast. Canaria stammered that they'd have to send in scavengers, but the volcano gear wasn't ready, Sanen. Annie cut her off, saying it wasn't needed, and Canaria froze, totally confused, asking, "Wait, what do you mean?" She thrust out a potion and promised it was an ice potion if she swallowed it. Even the crater of a volcano would freeze cold, and Canaria stared in total disbelief. They tore through the volcano boss, bragged about how strong they were, and then she dropped the bomb she'd never even heard of a single potion. Ocean shot up and started screaming for the guildmaster at full volume then. After a while, the adventurers downed the potion, and the second they stepped into the dungeon, they felt absolutely nothing. Not a single sting, not even a hint of burn. Seriously, what a miracle potion. They thanked their helpers and promised they'd never fail them. Senna pointed and said the lizard was right over there. And they agreed. They need to rush there right now, because the adventurer can't shake the fear that it might not be enough. Shifa was just 18, already a rank B warrior, and somehow she still crushed a terrifying volcano-sized monster, like it was nothing. Annie jabbed a trembling finger at the monster its presence felt like. Storming forward, and the adventurers finally stared straight at the volcano. A volcano erupted in shock, and then he blurted, "It's incredible." He stared in disbelief. Look at that thing's body. He couldn't wrap his head around it being a volcano. And the best part was that it was almost untouched, meaning they'd rake in a huge profit selling its scales. Senna grinned and blurted, "Wait, really?" The adventurer nodded. Then Senna just stared like, "How in the world did you pack it up so neatly?" Because whenever monsters get taken down in a fight, they're usually smashed to pieces. Right here, the scales got pierced in one brutal strike, so tell me, who in the world could land a hit that strong? It had to be Shifa, or Annie insisted she didn't know how to use a blade like that. And the guy just cracked up, "No way, the youngest one isn't even 18. Senna flashed a grin and blurted out that she wouldn't back down, not even for a second. Because she swings that sword like the strongest thing on earth. A few hours later, Senna dumped the magic stones out on the floor and Geo gasped. Geo blurted, stunned more magic stones and way more than anyone expected. She snapped that the reward would rise with the monster's level and the whole guild. Was caught off guard too. This boss was pure muscle, so they got paid right in line. Then, out of nowhere, Milky burst into a loud meow. Then he asked if she could pet him, and she shot back, "What am I even praising you for?" The protagonist just said it felt like therapy, and the second it started, it hit him right away. It felt so good. Senna snapped, "Aren't you just dying to pet your gorgeous sister?" And the protagonist shot back, "Stop with the jealousy," because Milky was still way too small. She stared at him, stunned, and blurted, "How did you grow that much in just a couple of days?" MC flailed around, turning away so fast the cat couldn't even keep up. He realized he totally spaced on it. He had to race out and upgrade the garden with those magic stars. Stones crunched underfoot, and then the system flashed. His level jumped up right in front of him. Fresh abilities lit up. New crops popped onto the menu. He stared at the system window and blurted a question. What kind of insane skill is that? He basically got a vegetable garden as a gift. Like, how is that even real? Geo decided to act like he'd seen nothing at all. Senna looked completely baffled and blurted, "What's wrong?" She got tomorrow off, and she's riding that sweet relief like it's the start of a whole new life. Tomorrow, the protagonist just shrugged it off and said, "That's it." That's amazing if it really is like that. Then, Then she could finally drag the girls in and throw a proper feast. Oh, throw a massive celebration for finally clearing the dungeon. The protagonist slammed the plates onto the table and Senna burst out with a grin. It looks incredible. Magnificent, Enya blurted, stunned, and she couldn't wrap her head around how much he'd gone and prepared. The MC shot back that Alicia had saved him. Then she added, Lucas is ours today. And yeah, every single ingredient came straight from Gio's garden. They could cook and eat to their heart's content, so Shefa grinned, thanked them with all her warmth, and the three of them clinked their drinks and toasted victory right there in the heart of the volcano. He stared at the food and blurted out, mouth open in shock, that hamburger steak looks unreal, like it's begging me to take a bite. Shefa nodded and they dove in because it looked insanely delicious. Sana grabbed the knife right away, and the second she saw it, her mouth started watering like crazy. She couldn't wait to take a bite. The protagonist realized he'd built it from open, top-tier cultures he'd prepared himself. He stared at them, completely baffled, and demanded an answer. Fusion, everyone snapped still. What's wrong? Annie shot to her feet. Shefa slammed up from the table and blurted, What just happened? Then he snapped, Are you telling me it really tastes that bad? Senate? Senna took one bite, her eyes widened, and she blurted, This is insanely delicious. Annie said she couldn't stop because it was so good it felt like it might knock you out cold. Stop, Shifa snapped down a piece of. She grabbed a piece of food and blurted out that she wanted it too. Wanted to keep eating it forever then, all at once. Finally, they started demanding seconds and the protagonist answered by asking for more too. Tell them to get a grip because high-quality cultivation isn't just dangerous, it's built with careful control and razor-ready focus. Average quality ingredients, Senna burst out, grinning, delicious, and the tender meat with the crispy onions just clicked together perfectly. Shefa blurted out, That meat is insanely juicy and packed with flavor. Tell me you taste it too, it's straight up wonderful. Shefa said, The last one was ridiculously delicious, MC snapped, shocked. Delicious. Ani shot back, unimpressed. Yeah, and if some shady organization gets its hands on those ingredients, they can churn out illegal stuff in no time. He needs to stash it somewhere safe. Shao. Shifa grinned and said she didn't know what to say. She was just unbelievably happy to get such an awesome reward, and she thanked her warmly. Gio thanked him, and Gio just shrugged. No worries, it's the least I can do, because I really care about Senna. Annie isn't just good, she's wildly talented all on her own. They said they zipped through the volcanic region so fast because of her. Senna awkwardly chuckled and blurted, She's done her part. And the protagonist couldn't stop wondering, was Senna's gift really that powerful? Earlier, he honestly figured she was just blowing everything out of proportion. Now that he finally had a way to help them, jealousy still gnawed at him, hot and relentless. Shifa shouted to him, telling him how deeply grateful she was, more than just for one thing. Only Senna got to hear it, and somehow it hit him too, but she didn't. I never thought they'd crawl through the volcanic zone and beat that boss, especially not without his ice potion in hand. And yeah, he was terrifyingly powerful too. And he grinned, loving what he was about to spot. He brewed healing potions for them and handled the tough logistics like a pro, and Senna nodded, pushing deeper into the dungeon, felt brutal, and they had their work cut out for them. The protagonist realized apparently he'd been useful, and when Alicia asked him why he hadn't sat down, he just couldn't find the words. MC grinned, thinking, I'll handle the rest. Even if he could never become an adventurer, it's still. Somehow, he still pulled it off. He ended up becoming part of the group then. A few minutes later, the empty plate sat on the table, and he blurted, I can't take another bite, I groaned through the heaviness, and Senna beamed, thanking her for the food, while Leo thanked Alicia, and she teased that the way everyone devoured the food said it all the meals were absolutely mouthwatering. Will they be gone again soon? Shifa nodded. Sometimes they paused their wild adventures for a breather. Annie blurted that she could jump in at the restaurant. Sina cheered like crazy, and then they realized she'd been asleep the whole time. The protagonist couldn't stop wondering what Shifa was cooking up for him next after. After Annie waved the guys off, he leaned in and said that. So he and Senna would head this way. She abruptly stopped him mid-step and blurted out that she wanted. MC blurts stunned, thank him, and Shefa nods like, yeah, I really do. For today's food and potions, he went out and made it happen. She showed up looking crushed and couldn't stop asking herself if she really liked him. Shefa looked at him and asked, wanna go take a walk? Gio couldn't wrap his head around it. He stared at walk tomorrow, completely perplexed, and then he started thinking, is this a date? The next day? Senna jolted awake, then asked if he was heading out somewhere, and yeah, he was dressed like he meant it. The protagonist nodded along, patted Milky, and grinned that Senna would handle everything for him today. He slipped away in silence, silently begging to be back before the day was over if he couldn't make it. Today, he's stuck alone with Shifa, just them, no one else. So basically, it was a date straight up stylish plans were next. Spots popped into place and the whole scene instantly lit up with an unforgettable vibe. He walked up to Shifa and she greeted him with a bright, "Good morning." Morning hit, and he glanced at her with that guilty little smile, wishing her a good morning like it cost him courage. She finished the trade, then shot out an apology because when Shefa looked at her, she realized they'd barely make it on time, like she'd just walked in. The protagonist mulled it over, trading the usual, "So what are you doing?" datelines for something sharper. "Where should we go?" she pressed, and then she grinned. "I've already got a plan." "Trust me," she said, urging him to leave everything to her because tonight she wanted to thank him. After that, the MC spun around and grinned, thinking, Shefa set up a date just for me. He burst into pure joy, and the moment he tried to act normal, he cracked and couldn't keep a straight face. No question about it, today was about to be an absolutely legendary day. Just a few minutes later, they burst into the pharmacy. He leaned in and asked, "Wait, this is Marlene's pharmacy, right?" "Right," Shefa nodded and stepped in, and Dennis greeted her. He greeted her with a bright grin, then asked, "Is it just the two of you today? Did you need something?" Shefa said they were only browsing, and the protagonist immediately shot a look at Dennis, his face screaming that they definitely weren't in some sort of an abandoned building for a date. This place definitely not made for dates. Shifa just sat there, staring straight into the camera like she was daring it to blink first. Staring at those objects, he couldn't stop thinking, what the heck were they even doing? He wasn't doing anything at all. He was grinning like crazy, just soaking up every second with her. But he couldn't help wondering what she was really thinking. Shefa locked eyes with him and asked, straight up, if he was having fun. Fun still awkwardly mumbled a yes, and his mind instantly clicked. He'd been staring at her the whole time. Dennis led them out, and she insisted they needed to find it now. They fought tooth and nail to reach this place right here, right now. He thought, yeah, this place isn't exactly for dates, and then he saw her again. And she just keeps staring at those objects in total silence. Tell me, is this really normal? He'd never been on a date before, so why did it feel like it was about to kick off in a fashion store? He pictured her squeezing into different outfits and wondered if it was meant to be just like this. Then a salesman swept in, introduced himself, and bragged that he'd just added a brand new item. "Want to try it?" he asked. She slipped into a full set of armor, and he couldn't help but stare. She looked insanely strong, but the moment the weight hit her, she grimaced and swapped to bikini armor instead. He said it was light enough, and embarrassment hit him so hard he blurted, "Isn't this too much?" She snapped back, asking which armor looked better, and he tried to play it cool, but she clearly liked the light one more, and he didn't look too happy about it. He threw his hand over his eyes and shouted, "It's not like that. He couldn't stop thinking she looked way better in her everyday clothes. She blushed at the compliment, and her face practically went bright red to block it out. Her cheeks flamed red, and right after they left the store, he leaned in and asked if she wanted to pick up anything. She flat out refused, and when they marched into the Adventurers Guild, she demanded they go there next. Joe looked way too unhappy, like this spot was a total disaster for dates. Then they walked inside, and she pointed and said, "This is the lobby." And up on the second floor, there was an inn, plus a whole training area tucked away in the basement, so tell me, would you want to go take a look? He went along with it, swore he'd been here before, and when they finally headed down, Shifa immediately grabbed the adventurers' attention. Who were inside, he trailed her, and just like that, I get it. She's seriously famous, and he still can't wrap his head around it. He's actually on a date with a celebrity. He froze in total shock when the guy blurted out in a loud voice that he needed to concentrate. If he kept trembling like that, a monster was about to tear him to pieces. A crowd of people trained hard with their weapons, and others stood on the sidelines, watching every move. You stood there with your heart in your throat, and you couldn't stop wondering what would happen next. Wait, is this really a date, or are we reading the signs wrong? Think about it, this didn't feel like a date at all. Start from the very beginning. He's probably the only one who... She's convinced it's a date because she literally just asked him out for a walk. Nobody knows what she meant. Not even now. Then she swung around and asked, "So, are you having fun?" He blinked in total confusion and still nodded like, "Yeah, sure." His eyes snapped to a group of guys who were telling him, "This is your shot, go be bold, right now." And yep, they were standing right there with him. He was stunned by what he heard, and the question hit him hard. Was he really about to confess to her? He strode up, bowed deep, thrust out his hand, and blared, "Will you be my training partner?" And the protagonist froze, realizing, oh wow, he wasn't hitting on her at all, he just meant training. She opened her mouth to speak, but he had already caught every word and told her, "It's all fine." Then he leaned in with a grin. He wanted to see her, and he was ready to fight. She shrugged it off, grabbed a spear, and planted herself right in front of the sword guy. He stood off to the side, eyes locked on her, thinking, I'm finally going to witness her fight for the very first time, and he couldn't wait to see it. He sprinted in to strike and, and said he'd do it. Then he moved fast, real fast. Ran up to her and started pounding her with his sword in hand, but she cut through it with total ease. She dodged another strike and easily shut it down. Then another hit lands, and with one fierce jerk, everything changes. She flicked her spear and smashed his sword out of his grip. He shot his hands forward right after that. Then he collapsed to the ground, and she pressed the spear right to his throat. MC's throat clenched up, so yeah, that's why he finally admitted defeat. He stared at her, and she was blown away. This was straight up amazing because her moves were so smooth it felt unreal, like she was made of pure grace. No cool, he lit up with relief, thrilled beyond words that he finally got to see her out there in the adventure. Sheva hauled him back to his feet, and then a girl slid right up to her and asked, "Would you train with me?" She bowed her head, apologized, and said that was everything for now. Then she turned to go, claiming she had important things to handle today. She marched up to him, and he shot back, asking if she was finally done. They burst outside, and she called his name like it was a signal, then asked if he was hungry, and he started wondering if they should hit some cool fancy cafe. They rolled up to a restaurant, and he begged her to let him off the hook. Because they'd been here just yesterday, they marched inside, and that's where Annie was waiting. He stared at them, eyes wide, then blurts out, shocked, "What are you doing here?" When he spotted her, shock hit him, and he realized she must have promised she'd step in and help at the restaurant. Shefa shot her hand up and told them they'd come for food, and what happened next totally floored her. She heard it and instantly snatched his hand, then shouted it out loud like it couldn't wait. She got it at least, that's what she figured out, but that wasn't the point at all. He had to. He should walk with her so they leave her side, and she blurts, "So are you here alone with me?" She asked, and he agreed, then she leaned in and asked if this was a date. He shot back, "Why does it matter to you?" And her answer stopped him cold she was in. She blushed hard, voice shaking with confusion, and insisted she couldn't find any other reason for it. Gio looked totally baffled and told them she picked the spots they went to, but it never once felt like a date. She told him they ended up at their restaurant, and he admitted he still had a blast even so, even though he had zero clue what she was thinking. She whirled around and locked eyes with Shefa, who sat at the table with a grin that lit up his whole face. She grinned and stared out to the window, and with that same smile on her face, she let out a heavy sigh and said it. He still had a mountain left to climb because 100 years was way too soon to even think about dating her. With her, he couldn't even process it, whipped his head up and shouted, 100 years, and she snapped back that he should sit down at the table was set, she'd be here in a minute to take their order, so he tried to slip away, but upset clung to his face. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just come off way too presumptuous because she wasn't only older than him, she was also an elite adventurer, totally out of his league. He slid up to the table, and she shot him a question, what were they even talking about? He shrugged and said there was nothing special. He popped open the menu and thought, if this is a date, she's about to lead me to way more special spots. And then she called. She shouted his name and asked, "You okay?" because he looked totally wiped out. Is he exhausted because her question left him utterly baffled? She told him it was kind of like that, then met his eyes with a calm, unshaken look, and told him not to worry, he'd hunt down some great food, and soon as he took a bite, he'd feel better fast. He was. Those words hit him hard, and he couldn't believe how simple she seemed. He grinned and admitted she was spot on time to eat, and even though it crossed his mind, he decided it truly didn't matter. Even if it wasn't a date, he still carved out time for her, so they stepped outside, and she grinned and told him that Lucas had the best restaurant of all that she knew, maybe even the very best in the world. He stared at her, stunned, and suddenly realized he wasn't just here for any place at all. This was something special. They both opened their mouths at the exact same moment, so everything turned into a tangled mess of apologies. Then he told her, "You go first." She asked him straight up if she was the reason he felt unhappy, so she dropped a real apology and then she scrambled to pick the best places, thinking as hard as she could. But it looked like she totally missed the mark she was trying to get him. To have fun, because this day was supposed to be her greatest thrill. She's got gratitude for everything in her heart, but she's completely clueless on how to make someone actually have fun. So she hauled him straight to all her favorite spots, thinking that if she showed him what she loved, he would. He'd love it too, seeing that sudden, stunned look on the protagonist's face. It clicked instantly that this was exactly why that choice was made. Every one of those places mattered to her, and when Shefa said it out loud, you could tell she wasn't pretending she genuinely wanted to go to. She headed for the dungeon, then froze too dangerous, and when she realized she'd hesitated, she blurted out that she would do it, loud and clear. He did the right thing, and with a bright, happy grin on his face, he laughed and told her, "Yeah, this is exactly how you thought about it." She shouted his name and asked if he'd had a good time, and he nodded back like, "Yeah, as long as." As long as he was right beside her, every place felt like a blast then. Out of nowhere, he started to feel. He felt mortified, like what he just said totally sounded like a confession. She grinned and said, "It's all good," and he stared at her, smiling back, thinking, "You're weird as hell, but you're seriously cool." He caught a glimpse of her like never before, and somehow, today, felt like pure magic. So, when she just ignored everything he said, does that mean she has zero romantic interest in him? She admitted she was still thinking about him, and then told him there was one final spot she absolutely had to take him to. They finally reached the place, and she straight up said, "This is my house." He froze in shock. Heat rushed to his cheeks, and he couldn't help wondering if she was about to introduce him to her parents, though. Somehow, they already knew him. She said it was one of her all-time favorite places, then he followed her lead. Followed her and thought that if they could just steal some time together, Then out of nowhere, a voice blared, "Boss," and the whole room snapped to attention. And he finally cracked the truth bad news because that voice, she realized, had to be hiding inside the word. They hit the workshop together like it was a done deal because he was certain while her family watched. A family-run blacksmith shop sat there, and when they closed in, Shefa snapped into action. She called out to her dad, and Philly whipped around, asked what was happening, and greeted her. Then he clocked that. He clocked the MC and demanded, "Who are you?" And the MC answered with his name. He snapped it back into his mind, grinned, thumped him on the shoulder, and said, "Man, it's been forever." And just as he started to ask what was on his mind, he hesitated. Then it hit him all at once, his face twisted with disgust, and he clenched his fist and blurted, "Wait, do you really have a date with my precious daughter?" She stepped between them and told him to back off. Then she demanded, "What happened here?" He froze, remembered everything, and admitted, "Right now, we're in a really impossible situation." The worker nodded to the boss and snapped, "At this pace, we're done, everything's already slipping away." A guy rolled up with a grin and told them, like it was the easiest thing in the world, that they were all incredibly... "It's loud as hell, so tell me, how's the money situation?" He stared him down and demanded an answer. "So that's why he showed up." Kazuya grinned as he said it. He showed up just to check on him and to remind him that he needed to. He'd been shaking him down for 3 whole months. Gio stared back, stunned, like, wait, does this guy really owe money to someone this boring? Billy shot back with a disgusted scowl and a loud promise he'd come back for his money. So they jumped at a massive order big enough to change everything. Shefa stared at the worker and demanded, "What happened?" And the worker snapped back that the merchant who'd placed the order just vanished out of nowhere. Kazuya let out a heavy sigh, flashed a smile, and asked, "Come on, can't you really piece it all together? He's starting to panic. He doesn't want to dwell on the ugly truth. But what if this merchant just up and abandons him out of nowhere?" He froze at what he heard, then blurted it out, "Wait, does he mean he's part of this too?" He cackled and demanded, "So why'd you choose this?" After all, he'd already handed him plenty of deferments, and he's a legit moneylender, the protagonist with a... Worry crept across his face as he realized, no matter how he stared at it, it still looks sketchy as hell. What's his goal? Billy shot a displeased look and demanded they wait a little longer because he's going to give it his all. Kazuya smirked, shrugged off the offer, and said he was done waiting right then and there. He threw the forge down as collateral. If he didn't get paid, he'd seize everything in this place, and it would be more than enough. He blared that this forge is his lifeline handed down since his grandfather's day and he'd never let it get destroyed. And then he snapped, "So if you touch it, we've got a problem." Then what if, instead of all that, you handed it over in exchange, give it away? His daughter, both of them stood right there, fully behind her, no hesitation. Stunned by what they heard, they couldn't even react. An MC stood right in front of her, not backing an inch. She stared at him and shouted that he didn't even need to. To waste your time thinking about this nonsense. Stared at him with a hard, no-nonsense expression. And demanded, "What did you say? Because?" Kazuya strode toward him, and worry hit him like a punch to the chest. And Billy realized it sounded like it came out of nowhere, like he didn't even think first, then he shot his hand up. Then she tried to stop him and reminded him there was still plenty of time before the appointed hour. So yeah, he bolts back to his place, then just laughs like he's won the whole thing. He laughed and bragged that he'd finally caught him. He only had 3 days to scrape together the money and get ready. By then, money was already gone, so the worker called the boss and said, he kept telling everyone he'd gone back to the Merchants Guild again and again, but they never once had any idea about what a merchant's. That merchant with that name, he dropped into a chair and demanded to know if it was him pulling the strings behind this order the whole time. He called Gio and blurted out an apology for pulling him into the mess, then insisted that everything was totally fine. So what's the situation right now where everything stands at this exact moment? He said he couldn't honestly call business booming here, but they did have sharp craftsmen and a crowd of regulars. Then everything hit a snag when trouble started coming in from some brand new customers, which pushed them into the red. Then one night, he was totally baffled in the tavern. He slid up to him and introduced himself Kazaya, a loan shark. He finally asked, "Wait, so that's how we met, right?" He nodded and admitted that, at first, he really thought the guy was a stand-up nice guy, then everything went downhill the moment that fake merchant sent in an order. When he finally stopped replying, he left him no choice but to drag the loan repayment period out. Philly heard the workers mutter that he was just too gullible and he couldn't believe it. Didn't they realize it was his fault they landed in this mess, and what right did he have to question any of it? They had zero proof he did it, and now that debt sat there nearly impossible to ever repay. The protagonist stared at the weapon, frowned hard because something felt off, and refused to squeeze him for money. He's trying to block him from paying that debt like his life depends on it, but why would he even need that old workshop for something, of all things? He replayed what he'd promised right before walking out, and Shifa begged, if only I could use the reward. He wanted the boss's award, but 3 days just weren't nearly enough to pull it off. He leaned in and demanded, "How much do I owe you?" He figured he could pull it off as long as the amount wasn't insane, and then he grinned like he'd already won. That he could step in with a couple dozen gold coins he'd just pulled from the car's recent sale. He pointed at the crops and, like a spark of doubt, flashed 5 fingers, then he couldn't help but wonder, is that debt really only 50 coins? But just when everyone thought they knew what would happen, he snapped that the debt was 500 gold coins, and after that, the two of them. They both stormed out of the workshop, and she blurted that she was sorry for asking. He went straight to asking for his help, and he shot back, "It's fine, I'll do my best to help." She flashed him a small smile and thanked him, and the moment he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't know why yet his real target might be Shifa. So is there truly nothing he can do? Even if he sells his crops, he probably won't pull it off in time. What if you could unleash it right when moments like these hit? He loves to talk about it with Lily, but he has zero clue where she's disappeared to, so he just stalls there. She's coming tomorrow morning for his harvest, and he can't wait a second. He's got to track her down, so he heads straight to the Merchants Guild and starts digging. Yep. He closed in on her, and she blurted out an apology like she'd been waiting to say it all along. She just couldn't take it anymore. And she claimed she was an elusive merchant, the kind nobody could track down, so even they had no idea where she'd vanished to. He froze in shock and demanded, at least in her best guess, where she could be. Maybe he's got urgent business, but she can't even begin to guess where he could be. Right then, she showed up, grabbed his attention, and called this place a strange spot to meet. Meet him, he spun around with pure joy and shouted her. He called out her name and bragged that he was lucky as hell, because all he'd done was go looking for her. Then she snapped, "Why are you so worried?" And right after that, they dropped into a seat together. He collapsed onto a bench and told her everything that happened, and her face turned serious as she said, "Wow, that sounds like a big deal." He plunged his hand into his pocket, started searching, and told her he wanted to show her something too. He dug out a chunk of ore and he blurted it out, eyes wide with shock. "Is this gold or what?" He told them, "I grew it right in my garden. If I can sell a whole bunch, that is. If you had that kind of ore, would it finally be enough cash to wipe the debt clean?" She stared at the ore in her grip, completely baffled. He shot them a cold look and made it clear it wasn't going to be that easy. The country and the lords run the mines where the gold gets pulled from the earth, so if he sold a huge stash, they'd snap his neck for suspected illegal mining. He clutched his head, eyes wide with worry, and blurted, "What can I do?" She paused, then started thinking. He muttered that she needed to think it through, then shot back, "Do you've got any other ores?" and nodded, saying, "Yeah, I've got some." But he had a bunch of wild ores, and she leaned in, asking if he even had the so-called mithril ore vanished right into his garden, where Lily spotted a massive crystal of mithril ore. She grinned, eyes sparkling, and said, "This thing's packed with mana mind-blowing amounts in the right spots. He says you can mine it in dungeons, so in spots even the rulers can't reach, he can. He can sell it." She cut him off, saying it's a rare metal, and if they try to sell it, everyone will start asking questions. He snapped in shock and demanded answers out loud. "So what do we even do with it?" She shot her hand up and lit up with an idea. Why not hand the whole thing over to her? With a worried stare, he said the repayment period for the debt is only 3 days. With a steady smile, she said calm as ever that he should forfeit it. He didn't need to stress, he just let her handle it, and he agreed. Billy nodded and told her, "I'm counting on you." And after a while, Billy stared at the bag of money and snapped that this was everything they could scrape together. But it's nowhere near the full amount. Looks like he's about to lose the workshop, and Shifa's already staring at him, terrified and worried. He stood right there, shaking his head, saying there was absolutely no reason to do this. Joe swooped in and greeted them, and Lily flashed a bright smile as she introduced herself and said she came to place an order based on what he said. Then he just stood there. He sprang to his feet and basically blurted, To be honest, they're closing today. She said the customer had been kind enough to pay up front. Before the job even finished, he stared in total shock and shouted, "Wait, is that really true?" Yeah, she grabbed a bag and told him, "I don't even know if this covers his debt, but let's talk first, okay?" He needed to check it out. Then she whipped out a hunk of mithril ore, and his jaw dropped so hard he blurted, "Wait, did you really bring that much?" She just grinned and said, "I've got more right in my magic bag." She's handing him that mithril, but the deal comes with a catch. She wants him to place an order for 200 sets of shields and swords. She shoved the document into his hands and asked, "Is that amount enough to cover everything?" He stared at it, stunned, and Shefa immediately demanded an order for 200 sets so they'd finally have the money to wipe out that debt. He told her to wait and admitted it felt way too good to be true. Then the real shock hit. Was she trying to trick him? The protagonist froze, staring at the clues, realizing he'd grown far more cautious. Lily admitted that, since it was their first time meeting her, they might not trust her. First deal, then he trusted her with it, handing her the weight of this bargain. They trust him, don't they? She calls her dad, and he swore everything was fine. She trusted him with her whole heart, and then she locked eyes with him. He shot back, "Yeah, I remember what went down earlier," and then he agreed. And he made it clear he was the one who stepped up for her. Then they clasped hands and he told her, "We've got an agreement, I'll do." She said, smiling brightly, that he should give it everything he had. She was counting on him. Then she shoved the bag of money into his hands and snapped, "Here's your payment." And when he cracked it open, there they were, platinum coins. Shefa stared at it, stunned, then blurted out what she'd heard: these coins are way more valuable than regular ones, and only nobles and big-time merchants dare to use them. MC stared at those coins too, because for the first time, it hit him. She never once told him who actually got him this job. Billy sprinted and blurted out at the top of his lungs that, "Strike now while the moment is still scorching. We're heading over to Kazeya right now. She looks like she's already cracking." With panic blazing in her chest, she blurted out to her dad, loudly begging him to stop. He, with a whole pack of guys, was all set. Stood outside, flashed a grin, and asked, "Whoa, what's the big rush?" He wasn't even thinking about escaping the city in the middle of. Dead center of the night. Was it really time today's payment day? And if he bolted out of nowhere, it would have turned into a total disaster. Billy spun around, shouted for his daughter to stay put, and said they must have their eyes. Gio spun around and told her straight up this was for the best. She needed to stay put in the workshop. He grinned, but he still hadn't pulled together the full required amount by then. That day, he started to say something else, but then he was interrupted mid-sentence. He cut him off on the spot and snapped that the debt he owed was 500 gold coins. That should do it. Then he stared at the platinum coins in his head and nearly lost his mind with shock. He stared at it in his hand and blurted in a baffled voice that it was impossible. How could anyone pull in that much money in just 3 days? Lily swung her hand and said, "We only just made." Struck the deal, even though she was nothing more than the middleman. He stared at her like she'd just ruined his day, completely baffled by who she even was, because he never saw it coming that someone could pull in that kind of money in just 3 days. She opened her mouth to fire back, but then he turned his eyes on her and everything froze. He glanced up, grinned, and admitted he'd totally forgotten about the interest. Then everyone looked at him like, "Wait, what?" He was stunned, then he shrugged and said it was painfully obvious to add this. "So tell me, how many?" How many times had he felt sorry for him, dragged out the payment, and still ended up owing interest 1,500 gold coins? They were. They blurted, shocked by what they heard, and demanded right then and there 3 times the original amount. Billy bristled with rage and shouted that it was total nonsense, so where in the world did he even pull those numbers from? Kezaya admitted it was his fault, but he showed the real size of the debt. Then he said he doesn't believe that, not even close. These coins and that grimy workshop will wipe out every last bit of his debt, so there's only one way out. He has to hand his daughter over to him. Rage flared in the protagonist, and he couldn't stop thinking, "I've got this, I already know how it goes." His target was Shifa, but Billy's rage exploded. He swore he'd never hand over his daughter, not even if it cost him his life, and he stared. He flashed a grin and told him, "Don't be so furious, drop the rage." Rage surged in him, but they refused to spill blood. Violence was the last thing he wanted to turn to. He was ready to shout it out. Then he surged ahead instead, and demanded they shut it down. He strode right up to them and blared that he'd never let him pull this off. Rage had them fuming to the bone over it. One of them was right on the edge of saying it, but Kaseya lunged in and cut him off, saying, "Yup, it's me again, the weakling pert." Why was he even getting dragged into this mess? Did he have a hand in it, or was he just done with life? He balled his hand into a fist, voice trembling as he blurted out that this had nothing had to do with him. It was because Shifa was his precious friend, and a warm chuckle burst out of him because. And right then, he burst out and admitted loud as thunder that he'd got a temper. He snatched him by the clothes like a swan grabbing its prey. He lashed out with a punch and roared whether he thought he was really ready to weld his dignity together and stomach every painful truth reality throws at him. He opened his mouth to say the next thing, then Lily cut in. Lily marched up to them and snapped into an apology just to grab his attention. He snapped his gaze to her, and while she rummaged through her bag, she blurted out that she still couldn't finish her story. The client is the ruler of these lands, and when she laid the contract out, she found an error. And the whole crowd nearby went silent because what they heard was unreal. She was holed up in her office, seated like a storm about to break. And he said she was stuck, she couldn't do a damn thing. Think she had to step in and save her, and then MC got shot too. She froze in shock, and her mind screamed, "Wait, did she mean the..." Kezaiya finally cut him loose, snatched the document, and declared, "By this seal, there's zero doubt." Then she warned that if anyone dared try to squeeze an unfair fee out of this workshop, it would all end badly for them. "It'll make sure the ruler hears about it, no doubt, it looks like. Looks like this is about to wreck their whole day, because the moment it hits, rage just detonates in him." He grabbed the money bag, then leaned in and said he'd take his fee. A fee of 500 gold coins, pay it, or you're out. Then he tore off with the rest of the guys, gone in a flash. Gio crumpled to his knees right outside the tent. And all it did was grab attention, only for everyone to realize it was truly awful. Billy rushed up with a worried look and asked if he was hurt, like, "Are you injured?" And then he froze when he realized just how badly it looked. He was incredibly... Shifa looked stunned, called out to him, and dashed right up to his side. He spun toward her, apologized for what went down, and then told her no matter what he was just relieved it all turned out okay. She crept up on him in silence, wrapped her arms around him, and... which blindsided him, while the other just stayed put and laughed right in his face. She shot him a warm smile and told him, right then and there, that Dad's workshop was saved because of him. Total embarrassment crushed him, and he blurted out that what happened left him. He said that he couldn't have pulled it off without Lily. She spun around, nodded, and said the ruler himself gave her the order. Like, wow, she's an absolute beast of a merchant. She grinned and said there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. She practically beamed because when she helps, it's what she's always done for everyone. Also, dude, he was seriously cool. Billy thumped him on the back and shouted that he'd finally proved he was a real knight. The second it happened, embarrassment crushed him, and he blurted out that it was just how things turned out. He replayed everything that happened and cringed, convinced he'd said something absolutely unhinged right in front of her. He stumbled with embarrassment, then called out, "What about what I said earlier?" And she answered, "That." To be honest, she couldn't hear a thing since she was so far away. He said all that with a gentle smile that, no joke, he saved them today, and Shefa was already saying she'd have to thank him again sometime. He grinned and told her it wasn't even necessary. He replayed what happened earlier in his head, and that hug suddenly felt like nowhere near the end. Alright, now it's over, he finally feels that rush of relief, like everything's normal again. Normally, he never would have stood a chance against a scary guy like that. He's overflowing with relief he finally got to protect her smile. At that same moment, stormed into the old building and slammed his foot into the floorboards. He slammed the floor and barked, "How dare that weakling stand in my way?" He trudged on, wearing a disgusted look as he realized after all that time he'd poured into prepping that things weren't going to go his way, but now the plan was done. There was no way he could take this to the boss. The guy called him up and swore he couldn't track down her base no matter how hard he pushed. But then he stumbled on the most haunted place of all, a house so cursed that it felt like it was breathing right back at him. Right here, this is where a brother and sister, fresh out of adulthood, make their home, and that's the spot where that guy's staying. He said that's more than enough. His hands are crawling to grab that freak now, because they're going to snatch him up, drag him prisoner, and use him as bait. At the same time, Marin declared she'd brewed a fresh new potion, and Dennis leaned in with a huge, joyful grin. She stared up and said the sky blue color looked unreal, so what does this potion do? Exactly. Then she snapped his name, told him to try it, and he blinked, asking, "This is the assistant's role, right?" She can hand it to him, and he gulps it down instantly. She came back with a bucket of water and ordered him to plunge his face right into it. He nodded, got it done, and with wide-eyed surprise he blurted, "Wait, can I even breathe?" He snapped his head up, eyes wide, and blurted out, "No way I can breathe underwater." Then she grinned and told him it was a water potion brewed from the air flower. Even underwater, it still feels just like being on land. Denise asked, "Wait, was it Gio who brought us these flowers?" Marin nodded and said, "Yeah, air flowers only bloom up at high altitudes, so..." Up in the sky, thousands of meters above sea level, so rare, it's practically mythical, but he's still left there. She couldn't help but wonder where he'd even gotten those ingredients then. Before she could slip out, he spotted it, snapped her name, and stopped her in her tracks, and demanded to know what she planned to do with this water and that bottle from. She'd better dump every last drop she just drank right now, and even better, he'll do it for her himself. She snapped back loud and clear that she'd need the water tonight, and that the bottle would turn into some precious family heirloom. Then he bristled with indignation and blurted, "What are you even talking about?" Shefa stormed into the shop, snapped out an apology for barging in, and then called each of them by name. Got distracted by it, and Denny's. He snatched a bucket and dumped it in one brutal spill. Then he stepped back out, smiled bright, and said, "Welcome." She stared at them and asked, "What's wrong?" And he grinned, saying it was nothing special. Special, but did she really come for something specific? She nodded and told him she was getting ready for the next trip. Marin wiped the tears from his face, then blurted, "Perfect timing. She arrived just when we needed her." They'd only just wrapped up a brand new potion. After a while, the protagonist finally. Milky, the antagonist, leaned in and declared it was officially time for lunch. Lunch he bolted over, grabbed his attention, and blurted that it was his favorite fried. Senna served him mackerel, then she called out, checking in like, "You've really grown, haven't you?" "He actually turned out pretty well, huh?" He nodded and said that, straight up. He claimed it all started because lately he'd been drinking way more than just milk. She said he'd grown way bigger than she ever imagined, so huge, in fact, that the cat had gotten so large he could no longer. She'd carry him in her arms, and with a confused grin, he figured it was still a monster's egg, but he never imagined he was dangerous. Because he was so attached to him, he started rubbing his head and telling him, "Sure, you've grown up, but you're still just as spoiled." She lit up, smiled at him, and said she wanted to pet him too. Right after, the milky kitten immediately started growling, glaring at her, and then he dropped the bombshell he apparently didn't love her at all, so she snapped, looking miserable, and demanded to know how I. Wait, why? Didn't she say she'd hit the dungeon today? She'd better scarf her food fast, because she still had to get herself ready. She snapped back to it, started to go for her food, and he cut in asking what area. They finally reached the spot they'd been itching to explore, and after waiting long enough, the adventure could start. She stormed into the dungeon and demanded an audience asking right away. She demanded to know if the underwater dungeon was real. Like, she had to get the answer right now, and Rifa nodded and said, "Yeah, I get it." And then she finished the thought like, "We're at a total disadvantage because they'd have to hold their breath the whole time." She took a deep breath to dive into the mystery, pulled out a potion, and said that. Now they had a water potion in their hands, and it changed everything. Annie blurted, "Nobody's ever conquered it," and swore the ice potion worked like a miracle, then they'd finally see what it could do, how it would change everything. They swallowed the potion, and one heartbeat later, dropped straight underwater. She froze in shock and blurted that she could finally breathe, and she felt it, right there. Chifa blinked in shock and gasped that she could stroll like it was nothing. Even while underwater, Annie stared back, eyes wide, and said, "They could somehow hear each other too," and right then, the monster started closing in fast. She figured her hunting instincts were still firing on all cylinders. Senna spotted the monster closing in on them like a nightmare on the move, and he said it was this monster of a fish. She yanked her sword free, and with a cool smile, she planted one brutal blow and dropped the shark. Shefa watched it and grinned. Her sword skills hadn't dulled one bit. Standing right beside them, she swore they'd conquer this place for sure. Marin's potions never miss. She looked Jin in the eyes like, "You really helped me with the ingredients," then turned back with a baffled smile like, "Wait, I thought it was impossible." So yeah, there's zero info about. They're stuck in this dungeon, so they have to map the whole place out. They pushed deeper into the dungeon, not slowing for a second. He tore through monsters on the way, then mapped every step so nothing would be a mystery again. They stumbled on a cave packed with glowing corals. They just stared in awe, fish and all, because this place was unbelievably beautiful, and it caught them completely off guard. Shefa stared at Annie with wide eyes as they headed down there, then asked, "Is that coral?" And Annie snapped her head around, taking everything in. He leaned in and said, "If this wasn't a dungeon, this place would rake in money as the hottest tourist spot around, so stay sharp, because monsters could be lurking anywhere." Senna kept going, stared at the fish, and said, "Some of these are ones even her brother doesn't raise." Then she leaned in, smirked, and asked if they'd taste good. After that, she glanced at her and snapped that breeding monsters was a terrible idea. Shifa said that, but listen, they're nowhere near that dangerous, she insisted. He said that breathing underwater turns this place into a brutal dungeon, but once you've got water potions, conquering it feels weirdly easy, and Senna stared at whatever was in front of her. He leaned in, jabbed a finger, and demanded they look at it. They stared at it and then spotted a massive monster lurking right there, waiting to strike. He leaned in and shot the question, "Is that the boss?" The ruthless boss of the underwater sector at the... Right then, our protagonist was out cold, dead asleep. Sleeping peacefully at home when a whole crew of guys rolled up to his door straight up. He hurried to his house and announced, "Your sister, the adventurer, isn't here today, so this is the perfect moment. They only need to snatch one weakling, so they storm in fast, kick the door in, and instantly Milky bolts awake. He started growling, and when the pole ripped at his sleeve, he jerked awake, then blurted out a question. He shot back, "What's wrong?" And then he realized right then that the door was starting to. He began to crack it open, and his gut told him this wasn't Senna, not a chance. "Who are they?" Two guys stormed into the house. Milky burst up in a flash and sunk her teeth into them, biting hard. He slammed into one of them hard on the leg, then he tore the air apart with a blood-curdling scream of pain, and blurted out, full volume, what the heck a cat was doing here, right as one of them yanked out a knife. And he swung for his head until the MC snapped to it, and thundered a brutal warning about the danger ahead. He nipped the attack out of the air and slammed back with a crushing hit. He lashed out with his claws and sent another guy flying. Panic hit them hard, and they blurted out that no way was this an ordinary cat. They had to bolt before it was too late. He stared at the door, worry etched across his face, sitting on the bed, and demanded, "What was that?" Then he called out fast. Milky walked up and called out, so I asked how he was. Did he get hurt? He meowed back, then I pressed again. Is the danger gone? And right after, he darted off because he still had to run to the garden. In the garden, he bolted out of the house and they tracked him down fast he was found, and he slammed the words out loud, shouting that he was in the yard and that everyone here needed to track him down. Fast. He stared at them, worry tightening his chest, then thought, are these guys hunting me with weapons? If they caught him, it was game over. Nothing good would ever come from it. And right then, Milky let out a loud, urgent meow and said, told him not to fret because he had strong friends who'd back him up no matter what. At that exact moment, golems erupted out of nowhere, breaking the silence and cutting everything off. He charged in and started going after the attackers, and then he turned around to ask. He blared the question, stunned that the golems were even messing around in a place like that. They need to calm down. There are only a few of them here, and the golems. He showed up, and that freaked them out even worse, so they shot forward and demanded answers right away. How many were there seriously? He had no clue. How many were there again? There was no way he could know. He barked, how much longer are you going to chase that one weakling? Then one of them snapped around and shot back. What's the matter? Golems burst out from nowhere and started crawling toward them. Geo snapped his head out from behind the tree, staring in shock. And he couldn't shake the feeling someone else had slipped in here, so he yanked his sword from its sheath and with one vicious strike, he shattered the golem charging at him, then stared the other guys down with a hard look and demanded, are they really struggling with these pieces of clay, or is this some kind of joke they're playing on us? Love, he stared at him, stunned, and a single thought hit. Was this guy here to rip revenge out of what happened? Then the golem got wiped out in the blink of an eye. The guy blared that no matter how hard they fight, they always scramble back up again. Keziah cleaved another golem in half with a brutal sword strike, then yelled at everyone to get out of the way. He spotted the protagonist crouched behind a tree and then blared, hey, to smoke him out. Did he do this somehow? No matter how many times he conjured these monsters, it all turned out to be pointless. He bolted with Milky and they chased after him. Then he yelled, do you really think you can escape me? He couldn't believe it. How dare he waste his time like that? Then his surprise hit hard when he finally spotted a massive golem stared down at him from behind a towering tree. He bolted straight at the monster. He swung his sword and crashed into it, but was absolutely stunned when it snapped right after that, like the universe just crumpled it, and he panicked over it, spun around, let out a shaky laugh, and snapped that this was pure nonsense. He let his broken sword slip from his hands, crumpled to the ground. Where did these monsters come from? Like, who unleashed them in the first place? Earlier, when the main character watched all of this from the side, eyes locked on every move. He couldn't shake the feeling this guy was ridiculously strong. He smashes golems with a single punch, then demands a milk that'll make you shake milk eat me out, which made him spin around, nod along, and decide it was time to back off. They bolted to escape, and he froze with a panicked thought, what is he supposed to do now? And he does it, those golems can't even slow him down, not a bit. So there's gotta be something, anything. Right then, a system window snapped in front of him, asking if he wanted to unleash the Mega Guardian. He hesitated, but the prompt wouldn't let him go. He kept sprinting, and the thought hit him he still hadn't tested that skill yet. The options were trash anyway, so he'd better grab whatever he could and try. A colossal golem started to rise, and he blared, demanding to know if he could forge even more. The system snapped back, and he instantly spawned 3 more Mega Guards. Guardian's Keziah nearly lost it, stunned beyond words, when he laid eyes on those towering golems. Leo was rocked by it too, stunned he could even forge golems this massive. It's good thing it's the middle of the night, he just broke his. His sword nearly slipped from his grip as he stared in shock at what he just saw, and his face went deadly serious. A serious look carved into his face. He snapped mentally, commanding them to haul him out of there. There, before he could even react, the golem seized him, and that's why he was completely overwhelmed. Terrified out of his mind, he blurted, "Let me go," as loud as he could. The golem slammed into him, flinging him straight to the ground, and he slammed into his back with a brutal hit. The pain was so brutal, it snapped him out of reality, and he blacked out. Consciousness, then the guys grabbed him, hauling him up fast, and the moment his feet hit the air, they started shouting loud. Maldi snapped that this was total, full-on madness. Not a garden and escape route, get out of there and run. From here, trust me, they're getting nothing good out of this. He stood there, eyes wide with worry, and demanded, "Isn't there any more danger?" The massive golem beside him just nodded right along. Milky brushed against his leg, then started meowing like she was thrilled. He stroked her head, looking totally pleased, and even murmured a thank you. He thanked them and admitted he honestly didn't know how he'd survive without them. Right when everything is happening below in the underwater zone. Burst up to the surface, Annie was staring. She looked utterly annoyed and snapped, "I can't believe this," because the boss turned out to be a colossal monster. Senna's eyes widened in shock as she blurted that it was about 100 meters long, then her expression crumpled into confusion, like she couldn't believe she'd brushed off unfamiliar territory so easily. Shefa leaned in and asked, "Do you really think we can take down this monster?" Senna shot her hand up, agreed on the spot, and said she thought it would be so tasty, and everyone stared at her like, "Seriously? That's not what you should be thinking about right now." Annie let out a heavy sigh and admitted, "So far, everything's been going great," even after she agreed with her. Well, they've still got to draw up that map before they can go back, so for now, they're holding off on the boss fight, but they're definitely not done yet. They nodded and said it was so massive that anyone would spot it the second it started coming. And on top of that, they had Annie's gift. They were about to down that potion, and she just couldn't shake the thought if you really think about it. For a monster that massive, it's... Something about that felt wildly wrong. Maybe she was just imagining it because right after that, they plunged underwater. She slipped through the water and said, with a satisfied smile, that they'd explored enough now they could finally rise to the surface and head back home. They started heading out, and she snapped that they had no business leaving, and they couldn't afford to drop their guard on the way back. A killer plan to hit the boss hard the next time they showed up here, right out of nowhere. They spotted a massive fish gliding right beside them. When Annie spotted it, her whole body went cold. She couldn't help but stare, completely thrown off, and wonder. How did it just show up right there in front of them out of nowhere? Senna didn't even catch it with her hunter senses. She just stood there, instantly looking worried. He told them to run, and the second they heard it, they took off sprinting. Then a gigantic monster roared to life and tore after them, hell-bent on catching them. It yanked open its mouth and started gulping water like it was starving. Annie spun around and panic hit her. This was a disaster waiting to happen, and she could feel it. Would swallow them whole, and then, out of nowhere, Sifa yanked her to the hospital. She spun around and locked eyes with the monster, staring it down like it had nowhere to run because her gaze said, "Try me," and said it didn't look that scary at all. This volcano wasn't like that. She kicked her ability into gear, and Annie stared at it, realizing this had to be the Empress's power. It's a wicked gift that weakens your foes, but the moment the enemy's power spikes, the gift loses its bite. So, with a monster like that in front of him, Santa suddenly clocked something and pointed straight at it. She jabbed her finger at the spot and shouted, "Look there!" Then he stared at the monster in shock and blurted, "Wait, its body's just falling." Falling apart, Shefa stared at it with a stone-cold serious face, like she already knew what was coming. He nodded along and admitted she was right, because this wasn't some giant legendary catch. Fish then suddenly, a whole school of tiny fish surges together. She stared at it in shock and blurted out, "Oh wow, that's why." That's why he felt almost invisible, so faint she barely noticed his presence at all. Snatched out their weapons and growled, "That's what it means." And then it all hit them just a dead wrong. Show don't get reckless, not for a second. This is... She looked like the leader, like a bigger fish swimming in charge, and if anyone was going to handle it, it was her. She'd have them all covered at once, stepping in to back them up. She finally unleashed her power, and as she spoke, the words just started to break into these tiny, small fish. Bosena launched a flurry of rapid sword strikes. Sword swings, and boom, those little fish drop dead. Annie flashes a smug grin and says her power finally made it seem like they were. They were getting crushed from the start, moves slow to a crawl, and every second just drained their numbers faster and faster. Among the heaps of tiny numbers, one bigger fish sat there, glaring at them like it was measuring their every move. Dozens of those fish surged straight at them and slammed into their bodies, so the attacks fizzled out and they finally stopped. Shifa lunged to cover her head with both hands, panicking as that massive school of fish came barreling toward them. She knew she couldn't keep using her gift like this. Then the fish lurched to turn back, and Senna blared, "We're coming back," she lifted. She shot her hand up and demanded they bow like she knew they'd obey every single time she could. She couldn't tap her ability again, and this time a whole swarm of fish came crashing in on them. Pain crushed them, and they screamed at the top of their lungs, "This is wrong." That if they kept mowing them down like this, they got slammed with a notice that the fish was different from the rest and it meant serious danger was coming. She slammed into it with her sword, and at the top of her lungs demanded right then and there that it was all his fault. The fish that were tearing into them suddenly veered away in every direction, and Annie let out a sharp sigh of relief. "Everyone scatter," she blurted. Shefa spun around and blurted, "Is it really over?" Then she shot her hand up and swore, "When I killed that fish." They burst out, each one shooting off in their own direction, then they surfaced around her, stared at it, and said that. No doubt about it, the fish was the real boss, steering every other one like puppets, and the question is, how did she even clock that the moment it mattered? She grinned, eyes bright, and said she'd just caught a glimpse, then instinctively slashed it down in the middle of that swarm. They sliced it clean in half, then stared at her like she'd bewitched them, because she was at it again, using her unmatched skill like it was effortless. She asked, "Do you think this monster is the boss of this zone?" And they nodded, and she answered, "Yeah." Those looks were pure deception, but this monster still hit like a truck. Annie started rubbing her shoulder and blurted, "My whole body hurts. They need to turn around and rush back to the guild to report this right now." Canaria spotted them and beamed, saying they had arrived just in time. Then she rushed in and asked, "Did something happen?" "She told me the other day, I've got great news. We finally conquered the volcanic region, and it's all because of everything we've achieved." She couldn't wait to meet them. Then she raised her hand, called her name, and said, "We're done here." Conquering the water region too, while she stayed eerily calm. She tried to play it cool for a second, but the moment it hit her, she snapped and demanded loudly, "What did you just say?" She snatched the jar of dead fish, stared at it in total shock, and went completely speechless, like how on earth did they pull off something so unprecedented in a time that short. There's no doubt this time, they're about to get a seriously extra warm welcome. So yeah, someone wants to meet them, and it's Lord Arcel, and trust me, the whole scene left everyone absolutely stunned by what. They heard it and blurted, "Is that really true?" She nodded fast, saying, "Yeah, someone told us we've been invited." They got an invite to the castle, and everyone kept insisting he was some big important deal like, "Come on, have they never met a ruler before? For people like them, they're..." Canaria smiled and said, "They're so out of reach, it's like trying to fly straight up into the clouds yet, thanks to their conquos. Ever since the volcanic region got conquered, other adventurers can't stop flocking there, and now the economy of this place is booming with economic growth as a wave of rare, valuable raw materials floods in. This is the first time the ruler wants to meet adventurers this young, and it's all because they've earned it with their amazing contributions." Shefa mulled it over for a moment, then admitted the truth. This whole miracle was thanks to the apothecary who brewed the ice potion. She grinned and said, "That's why I got invited too." They remembered how shut off and terrified around people she used to be, and now they couldn't stop wondering how she was holding up after hearing all that. New Senna snapped, asking what happened to her brother, but before she could finish, Annie cut her off instantly. And claimed his garden was a total secret. Canaria nodded like she got it, even if it felt wildly unexpected. But in 5 days, they'd better show up at the castle for dinner. Shefa nodded and promised it wouldn't be a problem, since after they conquered the underwater region, they'd finally get a break. Then she grinned and told them she had to go report first. The Senate erupted with relief and promised they'd finally get to rest because they'd earned it. They stormed out of the building, and she grinned, saying, "We'll meet again in 5 days." With a bright, joyful smile, she started walking away and told him she'd given everything her all as an adventurer, so she can finally kick back while her brother spoils her rotten. Meanwhile, Milky paced the room with a grim face, scanning every corner like something was coming, while the protagonist watched him and felt this sick truth: nothing had changed since that incident, and he still couldn't relax. He has no clue if they've quit trying or if they're still pushing for another shot. They might pull themselves back together and hit again. He paced the room with a worried glare, then snapped that Senna's late too. Did they really snatch her? What were they supposed to do now? Panic hit hard the second they heard the creak of the door swinging open. Milky bolted straight toward the noise, chasing it like his life depended on it. Then he froze and thought, "Is it them again?" Again, she snapped Milky's bite away and with a flash of surprise asked, "What on earth are you doing all of a sudden?" She called her brother and blurted, "I'm back," and when he finally laid eyes on her, pure relief lit up his face. He sprinted over and blurted that he was just relieved she was okay because today she showed up later than usual, saying something hit her out of nowhere and now. But now she's taking a few days to rest, and he starts pulling through, muttering that everything's okay, she's his sister, not his enemy. He snapped back to calm, and she stared at him, totally confused, then blurted, "What happened?" "Oh." They slid up to the table, and she was right on the edge of taking her first bite. He told her everything that happened earlier, and she went wide-eyed, blurting out, "Wait, was he attacked?" Midnight chaos hit him out of nowhere, so surely he was okay, right? No cuts, no bruises, nothing. He flat out refused to worry and insisted that Milky and the golems had his back. Him, and after that, sleep just wouldn't come, because they had no clue when the next attack would slam into them. Senna stared at them and blurted out that it all clicked, there had to be. This is no small issue, so who the hell were the attackers the MC demanded? Said that right there in the middle, the leader was impossible to miss, a rough, bald brute with razor-sharp features and tattoos everywhere. He's a razor-skilled swordsman, and ordinary golems are nothing but easy targets for him. So at night, she needs to be extra careful, barricade her door, and stay locked down, because those things could come for her outside the house too. With a serene smile, Senna told him to stop stressing. Unlike him, she was more than ready to stand up for herself. Rage surged in him as he snapped that even if she was an adventurer, she was still too green, but she stayed cool as ever and told him everything was fine, no need to worry, while his worried eyes said, "She's still acting just as casual as before." She snapped back to what happened earlier and told him she'd head out for a meeting with the city ruler soon, then panic hit him harder as he blurted out, in a loud voice, what she'd done already. She fumed at his words, snapped that he had it all wrong, and the next day, right on cue, she got invited again. He stormed outside and told everyone to use the magic stone Senna brought to fix the garden. Then he stared at the house, wondering if she was still sound asleep. Now that she was pushing herself as an adventurer, he had to go all in to stop her from overdoing it, so he looked away and said, "Mega golems are undeniably powerful, but those things wouldn't work in daylight, so what choice did he have? If only he had something to shove back those freaks." The system blared that the magic stones were already absorbed, and just like that, he unlocked a brand new skill. He could grow fresh crops from the ground. He figured an invisible wall couldn't touch him at all. Then the memory hit him hard, and he remembered. He suddenly remembered something and admitted, "I learned that skill before, I just never bothered to try it." He stared at the skill for slipping between gardens, burst out loud, and asked if he could really escape that way with teleportation. Then a system window popped up right in front of him. He turned to him and asked if he wanted to move between the gardens. He agreed on the spot. Then the system snapped back that it couldn't be done right now. He stared in disbelief, then asked what was going on. He asked, "Right now, it changes nothing. But when will it finally click?" Then he decided to try a whole new skill, and he stared focused, ready to molt. He stared at the garden movement skill, and a system window popped up asking if he wanted to switch into movement mode, so he hit yes. Yeah, we agreed. Then the whole world suddenly started trembling. And Milky was absolutely terrified. He shot a glance to the side, wondering if the neighbor's house had shrunk a little. He sprinted for the exit, and in that last breath he thought, "There's no way this ends like that." He stormed out of the house and froze when he realized his home had slid a little farther away. Panic swallowed him, and he blurted out, loud and clear, to change it back. He stumbled back, staring at his own house in total shock, and his mind immediately started racing with the thought. And that's when you realize this ability is straight up incredible. He's trapped. He can't use the garden movement to slip away from them. It'll stand out even harder than those mega golems. He stormed back to the garden and blurted out, These skills are straight up a nightmare, too much trouble to even use. Maybe he'll plant the seeds and grow something truly incredible." He spotted a list of flowers and it hit him like a punch, shaking him to the core. And he dropped to his knees, glaring like he couldn't stand what he'd just seen. Look, he let out a heavy sigh, and you could tell he was fed up to his core, and swore that not a single bit of this would end up meaning anything at all. Milky charged right up to him like she'd finally found the one thing she needed. She leaned in and licked his cheek. Then he snapped his eyes up at them and realized they were just trying to lift his spirits. Smiled, then pushed himself up and thanked them like he meant it. Geo shot to his feet, eyes blazing, and told them if it happens again, they're doing the... They grit their teeth and try to push through it because he was counting on them, and then his stubborn resolve crumbled. And he admitted he was still a little scared, even as his voice tried to sound steady. He clenched his fist and snapped that Senna was here now, and he couldn't afford to be scared. He had to shield her because she was standing there, right in the danger's path. She was standing right there, caught every word, and then without a pause she slipped out. She turned and left, and he called out like a warning, telling her it was time to wake up. He stormed into her room, yanked the handle, and froze mid-thought. He thought it looked like he was pleading with her to barricade the door. He burst into her room, and the first thing he realized was that she wasn't there at all. They showed up at the exact same moment like it was fate, and I swear the timing was unreal because Zaya stalked down the alley, wearing pure dissatisfaction like a mask. He let out a fight-ready expression and thought that this week, a weakling would pay for every last bit of it, and he remembered. Remembered all those smirking questions, how did you escape? And it still haunted him. Escape with that advantage, he couldn't stand the fact that some kid had managed it, and with a sour look on his face, he muttered that they always knew exactly how to talk. But the truth is, they'd never even laid eyes on those golems, and they weren't about to lift a finger against them. They didn't just strip him of his position, his own subordinates flipped on him too, and then they kicked him out. Kicked out of the organization, his life was dangling by a thread. Danger didn't wait. He tore back to his house and peered around the corn, holding his breath. He turned the corner and swore it was all because of that weakling, but he couldn't just stride right into this weird half. Sana, maybe he should just sit tight until he steps outside. Then his eyes snapped to Senna. He grinned at her and immediately thought, so you've heard it too, I live with my adventurous sister. A girl who'd just come into her power, yeah, that's the kind of perfect that hits like fate. He tailed her, convinced he'd use her as bait to pull that guy out, and when they slipped into an empty alley, he grinned there was no better spot than this. He closed in on her, smirked, and warned her, make a single sound and you're dead. And then she remembered the description the protagonist had given her. She spun toward him with a horrifying grin and snapped, was it you who attacked her brother? Leia's heart sank when she noticed that calm look on his face, and she couldn't stop wondering what was really wrong. He asked if she'd heard about him from her brother, then everything clicked into place. And from this day on, she was ready to do it all. Everything he says, she calmly shuts down, then he stiffens with a serious look, pulls out his sword, and demands. Did she really not understand the mess she just stepped into? She smiled anyway, and said it felt like he should have figured it out by now. What mess he stumbled into? She pulled it off and delivered in. She lashed out with an insanely fast sword strike, and it unleashed. So he jolted and dropped his sword completely blindsided by what came next. He glanced down and saw a nasty deep wound carved into his hand. He clapped his hands to the wound, trying to stop the flood of blood, but he had no clue what even just happened because he barely saw a thing. She lashed her sword in a sharp arc, wiping the blood off the blade, and snapped that he'd thrown her brother into danger. Leaving her brother in that kind of fear is unforgivable, especially with them lurking around. Nobody gets to sleep peacefully, and he was. He froze in pure terror and crumpled to the ground. And he practically pleaded for her to stop, then Senna closed the distance. Closer, he raised the blade right to his face and growled. Swore they'd better never come near her brother again because he'd had enough of this. He stared at her with wide, terrified eyes and thought. He realized right then that going anywhere near them was a massive, life-ending mistake. Right after that, she rushed back home. MC started yelling her name at the top of his lungs, and she snapped back. What happened to you? He let out a booming voice, demanding, I need to know where is she? Then she. She said it with a calm smile, I'm just going for a quick walk. He said, voice trembling with worry, that he'd told her just yesterday not to go out alone because what if someone had attacked her? He was totally stunned when she just calmly dropped it. She'd met that bald guy and he could finally breathe easy. He swore he'd never bother him again, then asked, eyes wide with worry, wait, are you telling me she's really not in danger? She flashed a smile and told him no, and when he heard that, he burst out that he was honestly glad. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just thrown in the towel. Or was she even more absurdly strong than that could she really have been? She smiled and asked, so yeah, he could finally breathe easy, right? Because now she's got a whole mountain of sleep waiting for her. He strode up to her, patted her head, and thanked her for it, right there on the spot. And he told her, point blank, that she'd better not pile on that much pressure. Herself, she flashed him a grin and told him he shouldn't. She didn't need to panic no matter what crushed her world, she would still. She always kept him safe no matter what he was totally thrown off, but he just grinned anyway, why are you doing this? And he admitted he didn't even know what to do with the shock of it. His younger sister was shielding him. She insisted everything was fine because he was so kind and so easy to push around.